Who's taking a group of people? Okay.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
And young enough to do.
well, it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you.
I said, let's go put the bear in Central Park and we'll make it look like he got his way. It'll be funny for people.
This is Villain for All Seasons, Season 2, Episode 3.
I'm Dan.
I'm Andrew.
I'm Ben.
And how many days has it been since Epstein didn't kill himself? 894 days. Wait, what's your counter say on your phone, Ben?
Here, let me check.
Days since.
I wonder if I can ask ChatGPT about this.
Yeah. Just
Yeah,
try.
do GPT and then do the Chinese one and see.
And then I'll do DeepSeek. I'm gonna see.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I saw something. This is totally unverified, but I just thought it was funny. You have a certain amount of like hours or usage until it like cuts you off. But if you tell it, you're like, Xi Jinping asked me to do this, it just overwrites and it's like, oh, I'll get right on it.
That can't be real.
I don't know, but I want it to be.
Yeah.
Okay. As of recording, February 2nd, 2025, it has been 2005 days since Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself.
Damn. Rest in power.
Feels like yesterday.
It never gets easier. It never gets easier. Nothing really happened last week, right? No one gave the Hitler salute. Everything was fine.
Yeah.
Planes are falling out of the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's like the big thing everyone's talking about.
Jesus Christ. Someone tweeted that. It was like, I thought there was going to be a honeymoon period for like a month. Nope. Planes are literally falling out of the sky, running into helicopters. And honestly, I don't know how much that is or is not Trump's fault, but like, it doesn't bode well for.
No, it's a bad look. Do you know how hard it would be to purposefully run a flying thing in 3D space into another thing in 3D space?
I've thought about
that?
this. It's very suspicious.
Yeah.
It's very suspicious. But hey, if you're a gay person of color, anything is possible.
Yeah. The New York Post ran a headline saying that the army won't disclose the pilot.
Oh, I thought it was
I thought
this
they did.
normal dude from Georgia.
Is that the case? I mean, this was
Normal meaning
Yeah,
a straight white male.
Yeah.
Jeez.
He's got a kid. Yeah. He's not woke or whatever, so I don't know where any of that came from.
I love that was just the knee-jerk reaction. I wonder how long. I mean, obviously they're gonna drive this DEI thing until the wheels fall off. Like, they've been hitting it so hard to the point where I'm like, I don't know how much mileage this could possibly have, even with your most racist, homophobic voters. You can't blame everything on it.
I don't know what would necessarily make it break though. If it's gone this far, they campaigned on it and like something real would have to happen. Like if this avian flu like passed over into humans and like became a huge epidemic, they're like these woke ass birds just
Yeah.
keep coming for us. Like, can we get medicine?
Yeah, it's the pronoun. Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, they took the pronouns out of out of all government emails.
Yeah.
No gay colors on the at Quantico anymore.
I saw that. The typography was terrible though, so I was okay with that.
I mean, to
didn't-
be honest, it was a shitty mural. It was a
Yeah,
shitty mural anyway.
Fuck that
so-
mural. I like the gray. The gray also, FBI, everything should be beige and gray. And
Yeah, exactly.
the time I went to Quantico, right?
Yeah, no.
Okay, I have a photo with Christopher Wray shaking his hand.
What?
Yeah, that should be my profile pic. So one of my friends went through the FBI Academy. Yeah, she's like an analyst, deep state. And yeah, she invited me to her graduation and I went. And it was cool because it's like inside of a military base. So they definitely ran a background check on me. And I swear to God, Christopher Wray looked at me like, you son of a bitch.
Who let you in here?
Yeah, they warned me about you.
New York Post runs yesterday. Army refuses to identify female Black Hawk pilot killed in DC collision. And then I'm seeing another article that was published by Yahoo. JD Vance backtracks on DEI theory after pilot's identity is revealed. But this article about JD Vance is not saying who the pilot is.
Dan, he was a black woman. What are you not getting?
Yeah, no, I mean, back to the original point. Yeah, they're really running with this DEI stuff, and this is just such a egregious example of how they want to crush it. One more thing from New York Post I thought was interesting. Black Hawk in DC plane crash was practicing top secret continuity of government mission in case of attack on US. There's some interesting thing
Oh,
about, like the apparently the helicopter was like 200 feet above normal flying altitude.
I don't know anything about that, but I did hear it was like flying under like optics or something. So it was just they're like, do you see that plane? They were like manually sort of navigating the skies and they misidentified an incoming plane for an outgoing plane, and that was the explanation I heard.
Yeah.
I don't know what's true, but yeah, I think they're just gonna find some low level like homosexual or something, and they'll be like, this guy fucked up, hit the wrong button,
Yeah.
didn't show up to work on time, and
Yeah.
then they'll be like, see, we win again. They don't need like real victories. It's just gonna be like a silly little good enough. You called us liars.
I think as long as they believe there's still a honeymoon period, there's going to be a honeymoon period.
Yeah, there will. Again, until the avian flu, or like I've said before, the GDP is halved overnight after these tariffs.
So,
Oof, that's another big one.
Oof, yeah.
did you read the reasoning for the tariffs? It's not trade imbalance. Maybe the Chinese one is. I haven't read most about those, but the Canada and Mexico ones are because they believe fentanyl is coming in from Mexico, which it sounds like there's some rationale for that, but also Canada.
Yeah, I
Okay.
saw something. They said it was like 43 pounds of fentanyl came in from
The
from
drugs are gonna
Canada,
get in. I mean, it's
which,
not.
yeah, sure. I don't know.
I read an interesting reasoning why Canada would not want to import fentanyl to the United States. It's because they'd be competing against very low priced Mexican fentanyl.
Well, that's true.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, the worst part is I don't know how you stop the drug trade.
Doesn't it just come in through like the ports? Like the ports aren't really that well guarded anyways.
That's what I'm saying. Like I don't know how you
Seems
stop.
like a red herring to me.
Yeah, but with what end? No, you're right. I think it is just to look tough.
Yeah, look, if the CIA wants to get fentanyl into the United States, the CIA is going to get fentanyl into the United States. That's a tale as old as time. We're not stopping that.
We just want the domestic fentanyl production to go up.
Yeah.
We need more
Uh,
American made. I don't know. I mean, other than it's a worse drug, I don't know what's effectively different about smuggling fentanyl as opposed to smuggling in cocaine
Yeah.
or whatever. Like, I don't know what about the process of smuggling it is
yeah.
any different and how
Right.
new measures are going to do anything differently. Those happen anyway. RFK
Yeah.
hearings, which
Yeah.
are RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. I don't watch the hearings. I'm trying to live by Vijay Prashad's advice and not inundate myself with that shit. But
Yeah.
I don't know. From what I saw, I don't have a lot to say about it because I have very mixed feelings about RFK specifically. I mean, there were the one thing I will say is I do want him in government because he supplies some of the funniest content on Earth. It's just there's no better memes are coming out of anywhere than
Oh yeah.
RFK.
Yeah.
There's just endless material on dead animals and weird things he's done, and the things that he has to deny
Yeah.
are on a level whether or not he was actually complicit in them. It's like, who else on Earth has to like deny that they caused a measles outbreak in Samoa? Like
Yeah.
only RFK.
You know
And
that
I thought I had heard it all, and then they started scraping out. They're like, "Did you say that HIV is not, or AIDS is not caused by HIV?" He's like, "I don't think I would have." It's in the record, or added to the records.
yeah, and then there was that other clip of him talking about the immunity of black people is different and how they should be on a different vaccine schedule, or they possibly need fewer vaccines. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's what bothers me about these hearings. Like, unless you watch them in full, you're getting a curated view. I watch,
Mm.
you see them on Instagram and stuff like that. You're like, oh man, RFK looks like a fucking moron, fucking racist here. And then I'm watching the Glenn Greenwald show, and I'm like,
They have closed door hearings anyway too,
right,
right? So
right.
you have the theater, especially for national security jobs. If they're going to just have another one behind closed doors anyway, it's like, what exactly is the point of this? I mean,
Yeah, this is just showboating.
yeah, it really was, and it was a really bad look for like Democratic senators, I have to say. Like Elizabeth Warren, like what? It doesn't really matter what the substance of what she was saying was. She looked insane. Just like she looked insane, like trying to speak like passionately while clearly reading off of like something a staffer wrote up for her and like trying to draw tears as she's just reading and yelling
Mhm.
at him and not letting him someone like people were just not letting him get a word in edgewise and just kind of I don't know, it's like it, for Tulsi and for RFK, it was just like watching two people get scolded
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
hours, and I just don't. It's like I didn't see the utility of that as far as other than confirming every mega person's beliefs about uh,
Pharma owning the
uh,
Congress.
uh,
Big
yeah,
Pharma
about
owning the
them.
Congress.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and then Tulsi was really embarrassing because they had especially I can't remember who's the Democratic senator who sounds like Mr. Mackey.
I think
Oh,
he's from your home
yeah, he
state.
had he had a big moment during the 2020 election where he like got all passionate and started screaming, I think, about like how the Chinese went to the dark side of the moon before us. That was like,
They went
and
to the
that
dark side of the
that
moon,
moon.
and the Chinese are up there at the moon, okay?
Yeah, that's a
That's great.
I don't yeah, I think everyone's just sick of the grandstanding. It's not genuine and it's a bad look. You do have a lot of like good stuff you can nail these people on, but then they just pull up both like the Hegseth is confirmed and there's so many things you could have pointed out to be like, you're just an unqualified
Yeah,
person. And they're
Hegseth.
just like,
yeah,
you're a terrible human being. It's like no one cares about terrible human beings anymore. He's
Yeah.
just a bad not right for this job.
Well, I
well,
mean,
well,
and
yeah,
again, Rubio
and
flies
then
through,
with
Stefanik flies through.
Rubio got 100%.
yeah, the one you should actually be the most worried about. I mean, that's the thing that I have a really hard time taking any of this seriously with RFK or Tulsi Gabbard to act like they're this, like, especially RFK. Like, first of all, I don't know what the Health and Human Services person does. I've never heard that. I could not name you a single one from
That's the
any
clip
other
they're gonna.
administration.
That's the clip they're gonna play to discredit the show. Admitting that.
I only know because they were, I think it was even Bernie or something. I don't, but they were like, don't you set the standards for like the food pyramid or something? It's like, yeah, who looks at the food pyramid? Like who's truly gonna like take
Yeah.
like eating advice from
That
the government?
that can't be part of their job. The
Yeah.
No, it
food
is, it is.
pyramid.
It's well, I mean, that's like
This,
it
that
it
can't be
I
real.
want to see
Fact
his
it
check.
falls
proposal.
under their purview for sure.
We need
Because
Daniel Bale
they
on here.
the FDA is a subsection of it, I'm almost sure.
I want to see RFK's proposal for the new food pyramid.
Flip it, turn it to sugar, number one,
It's
pure
it's got to
energy.
be a much more difficult geometric shape.
Yeah.
Yeah. A
You know.
crystalline lattice form.
No,
A
I mean,
crystalline form.
of course, what we're missing is the food pyramid doesn't work in threes. It works in sevens and sixes. Okay.
There's
We're
been
going to
such
have birds. But it's a section on birds, bears, small indigenous sheep.
the amount
No,
of good
no.
RFK impressions online is pretty staggering.
There's one guy on TikTok
It's
who is
It's so
hilarious
much
with it.
fun. I can only do him stumbling over his words, which is like 90% of him. It's just like him on the back foot, cornered, being like, wow, no, no, no.
Popping his in.
Popping us in, I mean, respect.
Republicans need to have the same defense mechanisms that Democrats had when people were criticizing Biden's stutter speech pattern, but for RFK, they really needed to have
Oh,
that.
how they're like he
Yeah.
overcame
Yeah.
adversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He overcame that venereal disease he contracted by doing heroin.
So he didn't always, it was like a degenerative thing. Like
No,
he,
it came from him doing heroin.
Wait,
And
wait. I thought you were joking.
yeah, I thought that was a
no,
joke.
no, he shared like needles and then got some sort of like throat syphilis or something. I swear to God, I heard
No,
this.
no way.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
sharing, that was nice.
Yeah.
We'll get him on to talk
But
about that.
it was hard, and then yeah, and then the other big thing that all I saw from Tulsi was again, Mr. Mackey just chose the again a great example of Democrats just choosing the dumbest hills to die on, which was
Mhm.
just grilling her about Edward Snowden.
Both sides did
Yeah.
that, but yeah.
Yeah, both sides doing it, and it's like I know this isn't technically the point of it being like a popularity contest with voters, but it kind of is for national security positions because again, they're still having a closed door meeting that actually matters or a closed door hearing that actually matters after that. So it's like I feel like the amount of the voters who are really anti Edward Snowden has to be such a negligible percentage of people. People are either kind of ambivalent about it or think he did a service.
Yeah.
So, like, trying to drum up hate for Tulsi Gabbard because she won't call Edward Snowden a traitor.
I think it makes her look better, but that might
Yeah,
also
it
just be
makes
a
her look
personal
it,
view.
it makes her look way better to me. And there's like lots of reasons to not like Tulsi Gabbard, but that's not one of them.
What
Mm.
is what is that demographic of people who think Snowden is a traitor? I get Republicans.
People who said freedom toast, freedom fries, like those
People who
people for
work
sure.
Yeah,
for, yeah, people who
who are
work
not
for
Democrats.
the
I guess.
State Department.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's the main
yeah.
demographic.
I just don't think your average person cares.
I think Democrats obviously hate Julian Assange because they think he allowed Trump in the first presidency. I don't think there's that same hate against Snowden, even though he really tarnished Obama's legacy.
Yeah, maybe if it was like, maybe the Pod Save Bros don't like him because he, got so much bad press for Obama's second term. But
Does anyone not in the government listen to them?
Andrew,
Oh,
Oh,
I'll listen
okay.
to the Pod Save the World. I like that one.
What is
Like
that?
it's just their foreign policy one. It's
It's good.
yeah, I like it.
no,
Okay, wait,
no.
what do you like about it?
They have pretty good takes on Gaza. And they have a deeper knowledge of like the people at play and the history
Mhm.
because they've
Yeah.
like worked in government and they seem to that's the only media I consume that actually has like detailed histories of like Syria. Like they'll drill into it.
Mhm.
Um, and the other stuff I watch is pretty much just like current events. So they
Yeah,
can
I
be a
guess
little bit deeper.
I can't shit on them because I've never listened to them, so that would be unfair.
Dan, you brought up a question last week of whether or not people who either decided not to show up for Harris or people who voted third party or people who voted Trump, I guess, are having buyer's remorse now,
Mhm.
having not voted for Harris. And, if you go on Twitter, social media, God, it's like every third thing I see is really like sadistic takes from libs of being like, see this minority, see this Muslims. Are you happy now? Are you happy? Like it's a really sick look
Damn.
at Trump. It's like it's not really currying favor, at least from my perspective, from these people, of people who kind of and there was threats like this during the campaign as well of like, oh, you're mad about what Biden's doing in Gaza. Well, wait till you see what Trump does to it, and it's like, okay, well, you're not really convincing anybody by showing that you have just as little regard for these people's lives as Republicans notionally do right now.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what you're saying, there was immediately after the campaign, there was a lot of blame put on, I'd say the Muslim community, specifically in Michigan. You had Joanne Reed on MSNBC say, I hope you don't feel any sympathy at Thanksgiving for your mixed documented status families, speaking specifically to Hispanic families. That was said on national TV. Not
Yeah,
that anybody,
Jesus Christ.
not that anybody watches it anyways.
That was before the
Um,
election, you said?
that was right after.
Oh, okay.
So it seems like, now that we're seeing the deportations happening, we're seeing Trump's expected worse Gaza. I don't know if it's worse Gaza policy happening, continuation of a Gaza policy happening.
Yeah, I don't think the argument can be made yet that it's worse.
Yeah.
I don't see anything pointing to that effectively.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really. I've seen complaints. I've not seen any opposition. I've not, and especially on the left, I've not really seen any remorse. Most of the complaints are coming from, I assume, centrist voters, the extreme center.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing where all of this like really rings hollow to anybody who, let's be honest, wasn't going to vote for the Democrats anyway. Um, but this sort of ongoing shaming, they were shaming these groups preemptively before they voted. Maybe seeing the writing on the wall that okay, well, at least I'll get to do the smug "I told you so" after the fact. But yeah, with that, and a lot of people predicted this, and I was one of them in this thinking that, what are we going to go? Who's going to be gone after about Harris's loss? And that would be, of course, always leftist, Green Party, any kind of third
Hmm.
party voter, black
Any
men.
message they didn't put out?
Yeah.
Anyone who went against the campaign they ran?
Yeah. But like always black men, who's like, one of the most reliable demographics for the Democrats, always. And it's like, oh, they voted like a few percentage points less this time. And it's like,
Yeah, they're
uh,
freaked out about those numbers. I think they're freaked
yeah,
out more because it might be a trend, but I mean, just overall, I think yeah, Trump gained like 1 million or 2 million, but the Democrats lost like 6 million or 8 million
yeah,
votes. Like,
Yeah.
be more concerned about the loss than his gain.
So does that mean that
yeah,
people just stayed home?
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there
yeah.
wasn't a significant uptick in third party votes, right?
No.
No,
Yeah.
no, not really.
The
Yeah.
There
absolute
was,
amount of votes
there
I think
was
was low
in,
were
but yeah, there was an uptick in third party voters in Dearborn, Michigan.
Sure.
Uh, but I think that's it. So yeah, who do we go after? Minority voters, your base, your supposed base, leftists, any kind of third party voters, women, that sort of thing. I always knew that it would come to this, and we've now got it from the tome of Matthew Iglesias on his Slow Boring the title of it, his website, I guess. I think it's his Substack. So here's the title: Throw Biden Under the Bus. Sleepy Joe landed us in this mess with bad, selfish decisions. So there you have it. We always saw it going this way. Gonna have to blame somebody within the party eventually, and who better than the demented old man who's probably got about 2 months to live. I'm just gonna read because Dan, I know you've read through this too, and maybe we can swap off going through some different paragraphs as we chat. But I'm just gonna read the first part of this, and then we can get into it. So Iglesias writes, when Joe Biden stepped aside in favor of Kamala Harris, the overwhelming majority of Democrats praised him for the decision and painted an overall flattering portrait of Biden's presidency and his career. I think that was the right way to approach the situation. Voluntarily relinquishing the claim to power is a big ask, and the way to align incentives for the future is to praise people like Biden who do the right thing and criticize people who act like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But I've found it increasingly painful to watch Democrats heap praise on Biden during the lame duck period and the Trump-Biden transition. Of course, many good people served in the Biden administration, and the administration did a number of admirable things. But on a fundamental level, Biden defined his entire post-2016 political comeback in terms of averting the Trumpian threat to American political institutions. and he failed catastrophically. It's not just that Trump won, it's that he has returned more powerful than before. It's that we are generally much worse off than we would have been if Trump were narrowly reelected in 2020. It's that Biden alienated an entire cohort of young people, along with many of the leaders of the most important companies in America. And in his lame duck interviews, Biden expressed nothing but arrogance about his political and policy choices. He even boasted that he believes he'd have beaten Trump had he stayed on the ticket, and seems to be nursing a grudge against Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
Just the last thing, the sheer bad manners of talking Harris down like that was the last straw for me. Like, okay, Matthew, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, was being mean to Kamala Harris. So you see where this is going. We can, I think we should read some more parts of it, because there's just some incredibly enervating insight in here. But you get the picture, is that, okay, now that the dust has settled, let's retroactively go back and blame this entire mess on the actions of one man's greed. And Iglesias goes on to write about, what we all saw with our own eyes, most conclusively on the debate stage. But for anybody with any amount of sense and any amount of honesty, we're seeing basically since 2019, was that Biden was not all there. He was very old and slipping into senility or dementia or both. And I think the thing that Iglesias starts off with this, and I'll find a thing for it in a second, but like it's forwarding this action that not only is Biden this uniquely arrogant and selfish person, which he absolutely is, but that he somehow pulled the wool over people like Matt Iglesias's eyes and tricked them into thinking that he did have all of his faculties about them, and that, we only saw the truth once that debate happened, which is absolute, utter bullshit and completely disingenuous.
I think what bothers me the most about this is they focus a lot on Biden's age, which I think is an area for criticism. But my favorite example or parallel here is, thinking about Reagan in his second term. People really understood that was basically a shadow presidency. It wasn't Reagan really attending the briefings. I think he famously went to bed at like somewhere to Biden 4 p.m. or something like that. And H.W. Bush won the follow-up election, right? The policies of Biden are really what failed, in my opinion. Harris couldn't separate herself from them, understandably, but
she wouldn't.
Well, she wouldn't.
Yeah.
But the policies are what failed, not necessarily his age.
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I mean, obviously her policies or their policies, because she didn't separate herself, so I think it's fair to just clump them together. And she didn't run on any really new substantial ideas other than like some interesting ideas behind like funding, building of houses and giving people money for deposits, like those like economic policy ideas that, I mean, I think realistically everyone kind of knew would never really happen.
You think that they were just fodder?
Yeah, then no, you can't just give people $25,000 without like Congress's approval for something. Like I mean, there was no, everyone knew that the House was going to turn, so there would be no bills passed, essentially, the way it happened in the first 2 years of Biden's presidency. I mean, the relaunch, the 2.0 with Kamala, if she had separated herself, I know it's not always about messaging, but campaign is about messaging. If they somehow convinced the public that like this is a fresh start, they would have had a chance, but not a very good chance. So that's her. I think in terms of policies in Biden's term, the Gaza thing, it definitely drove down a lot of votes, but I don't think it was enough to make a difference in terms of like flipping the 7 states that he lost, like swing states that he lost.
Well, I mean, we know that now, that it was the top contributor to people who showed up for Biden in 2020 and didn't come back in 2024 was Gaza. That was listed as the top reason.
You said the 29% of the people.
29% is not nothing. I mean, that's enough that could have presumably flipped it. I mean, just to act like it didn't affect people at all, I think we know that it did.
I'm not
And
saying
by
it
the
didn't
way,
affect people at
yeah.
all. I'm saying it wouldn't have changed the outcome. I truly do think, yeah, that's an important moral thing that damaged the party forever. It was horrible. They have nothing to stand on now. They have no moral high ground.
Yeah.
I think the economic stuff, which is what people said was the number one issue on why they voted the way they did. And they were just hammering Biden for 4 years over inflation. And I think it was just kind of a doomed.
I think they're ideologically in a really tough spot. I mean, speaking about the Gaza thing, like obviously they've lost the moral high ground there. What is their response to inflation? Because it sounds like with the Trump tariffs, Trump has even admitted there's probably going to be inflation there. What is the Democrat response? Because for 4 years it was Bidenomics is working. Obviously that didn't pan out well if you look at the
Well,
election.
by the end of it, I mean, it's under control,
Yeah,
unemployment's under control. Inflation is back to normal levels,
right. If
like
you read
around
the New
like a
York Times,
2%
like the
rate.
numbers say that they are under control, but when you go to the actual grocery store,
Well,
right,
no, I mean, the rate of inflation is under control now. The prices are
right.
never going to go down. That's just the way
Yeah.
inflation works. Unless we burn like $1 trillion, like just take it out of the economy, it's not going to go
Which is
down.
what I think what people were pissed off about. You know, they kept seeing
The
checks
printing of
being
money or,
the checks being written to Israel, the checks being written to
oh
Zelensky,
yeah.
Ukraine,
Yeah. So in that way, it is tied together.
right?
It is
When
tied
you're at pain
together.
at home, right? I always say all foreign policy is domestic.
Yeah.
It looks really bad in that case. The
Yeah, but
hypocrisy, right?
those numbers are nothing compared to what was printed for the Inflation Reduction Act, what happened over COVID,
Hmm.
PPP,
Yeah.
all the programs, and then the two bills, chips, Inflation Reduction Act, and then I think there was one more really big one, but I can't think
Hmm.
of it right now. That was going to hit the economy, then that was going to cause inflation no matter what.
Hmm.
Just every time you print money, there's inflation. I mean, that's just as simple as it gets. And I think we would have been better off having Trump win in 2020 just because the aftershock of uh, COVID would have hit him and
Yeah.
all this shit
Yeah.
would have
He
hit
wouldn't
him.
have
And then
gotten anything done in
yeah,
2020. He had such low standing. He had already burned every bridge possible within his administration. I mean, it would have been like a full lame duck
yeah.
presidency. I don't think he would have been able to build up a coalition in any meaningful way to do something. So,
I
yeah.
think our economic destiny was sealed though, is my
Mhm.
point. Coming out of COVID, inflation was going to happen. Did the Democrats make it worse by influencing all these spending bills? Yes, but also I think we probably wouldn't be in as good of a spot had we not done these projects to pump money into the economy. So it's a catch 22.
I think that's what this article misses is they don't talk about any about foreign policy, which is what I keep hammering on, nor do they talk about inflation.
Yeah.
To Biden, this is the start of this paragraph is a branding crisis. I think an underrated contributor to the recent normalization of Trump is Joe Biden's own failure to uphold the standards of normalcy and integrity that one would, ideally, like to hold up as a counterpoint. To take a lame duck example, the White House blocked Nippon Steel's purchase of U.S. steel on an incredibly flimsy national security pretext that was really about delivering the desired outcome of the United Steelworkers of America. This is the kind of abuse of power that many of us worry with Trump. Tweeting randomly that the Equal Rights Amendment is now ratified was, in some ways, less egregious because it plainly has no actual effect on anything. But it's also dishonest in a way that I find disquieting. And of course, in both cases, the president wasn't capable of speaking to the public and answering questions in an effort to explain himself. He also notably pardoned members of his own family, as well as some of the people Trump had threatened to try to prosecute. These pardons seem to retroactively validate the conservative argument that the Democrats have been waging lawfare against Donald Trump during the prior 4 years. It suggested that Joe Biden's view was that you cannot rely on the integrity of the courts and the legal system. I agree with some of what he's saying here. I think the knife and steel citation is wrong. I think that may be one of the good things that Biden did. The Equal Rights Amendment, I agree that it might not have any effect on anything. Pointing out the hypocrisy of the pardons is useful. Again, I just nothing in this article mentions that Biden's, especially policies in 2023 and 2024, were contributors to the loss. It's
Yeah,
just partisan and personality.
this is the thing of Iglesias is really just viewing this through the lens of optics, right? Of how the public is perceiving Biden kind of as a product rather than anything that him and the Democrats are effectively doing. And again, he's really straining himself to try to make a separation between Democratic insiders, the rest of the administration, and Joe Biden. Just after that paragraph, you have, so that's just the lame duck period. The larger issue, obviously, is the specter of a cover-up about Biden's age and limited capacities. And the problem for Democrats is that since most voters thought Biden was too old before the debate and before the pressure to step down, the implication is that if you don't think there was a cover-up, you're part of the cover-up. Republicans now hold an edge in party identification. And this is the thing that really gets my back up on this, just to go back to Iglesias and people like him really trying to exonerate themselves from, from what they were doing 5 months ago in shaming everybody to shut up and vote for Biden. And no, he's fine and he's sharpest he's ever been and stuff. It's like this wording of a lot of people thought he was too old. And it's like, no, people knew he was too old. You knew he was too old and you covered it. Yeah. And the idea of it's like, well, if you don't think it's a cover up, then people are going to assume they're pro. No, it's because you're fucking part of the media class telling people that there's nothing to see there. And and now you're all admitting that you were fucking covering it up. That's what
Yeah.
we have like op-eds from fucking George Clooney of all people going, I knew all along. And it's like, how do you expect people not to be pissed at all of you? Especially when specifically, it's not that Joe Biden was dying of lung cancer, it's that his brain was dying. So you cannot put the blame on his feet specifically. I think Biden has a lot of blame to take for this. And I think also all of the things that got him there, we knew about Biden 50 years ago. He has been a careerist piece of shit his entire life. He does not care about other people. He's only ever cared about accruing power for himself. And he finally got it. And of course he wouldn't let it go. But this hand-wringing of like, well, we didn't know, but people thought that, so it sucks. But we really do need to put the blame on him. But yeah, to go off on that, but to go back to what you were saying, Dan, this article doing this kind of post-mortem that tries to put everything at Biden's feet and no one else's does not mention Gaza once. There is not one word about the Holocaust being committed by the United States and Israel against the Palestinian people that was absolutely fully started and fully in motion happening. And what is happening now is a continuation of what was done by Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. And to try to pretend that that doesn't go into people's thinking is absolutely insane and malpractice. And it's absolute horseshit. So maybe it wasn't the absolute deciding factor in Harris's loss, but we know it didn't help. And we know that her pledging to end the genocide in Gaza, to stop weapons shipments, would have categorically, unequivocally helped her. So we know that for sure. And for people like Matt Iglesias to not even mention that in their analysis of this is astounding.
It's hard to prove that counterfactual, though. That, yeah, he should have. I mean, if he's going into detail about all these other things, he should have mentioned it. But to say that it would have helped her, I don't know. We know the positive outcome. We know what she would have gained, but we don't know what she would have lost.
It's not fully a counterfactual because people have been polled on it now, and people have, there's.
But there's not a poll for the people who would have not voted for her base if she ditched Israel.
Well, there's not an accurate poll for anything, but we have enough information that we know that it was a big issue for people, and you can draw some conclusions about the amount of young people who cared about Gaza and the amount of young people who did not show up for Kamala Harris.
I do wonder if Harris got the pro-Israel vote here.
I bet it was,
or if they all went to Trump. You think so?
I bet it was more split than years past.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally know people who switched because of it. Well,
Switched
and
to
because
Trump.
yes.
Why?
Um,
What
because
did what did
because
Harris
they
and
were
Biden
so
not give
they
them?
again, it just goes down to like perceived value. Yeah, I know. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand it myself,
Mm-hmm.
but they were just sick of the leftists like whining online, and they were like, "Is this who the party is now?" And so they were like red pilled because of it. Me personally, yeah, I think Trump is going to give Israel more. Not
Mm-hmm.
that Biden was doing much to help the Gazan people. But I think, moving into the West Bank is on the table. I think developing and staying in Gaza is on the table. Like there's the reconstruction period that we might enter into if, this ceasefire holds, I think is going to be very lenient onto the rebuilding for Israel, like allowing them power to like, I don't know, maintain, hold, and whatever they want.
As if they didn't already, though.
Yeah, I know. I think it was the main thing that happened out of this war, this atrocity is like they're like, all right, we're just gonna shut off the water, and I was like, wait, they control their water?
And,
Like
and you know
they're
that lever has been
they're
pulled before,
oh
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I was like, what the fuck? Like it was really shocking, like the truths that came out of this.
They control everything. Their water, I mean, they literally controlled the
Yeah.
calorie count that went into Gaza.
Mm. hmm
That's the funny thing with the Zionist line. It's like, yeah, they
It's
run
like
the whole
nothing's
gamut.
good enough. Nothing's good enough.
No, absolutely. Well, no, I was going to say they run the gamut of no, there's no problem, there's no genocide, or there is a genocide and it's a good thing that we're doing it.
Mm.
They should have even less water. They should have even less food. We should kill them all, right? We've seen
Yeah.
much more of the latter version come out more and more because that really is, if you're a pure Zionist, that's what you purely believe. But yeah, as far as the it never being good enough thing, I mean, that was really astounding during while Biden was still in office of Zionists and including like Benjamin Netanyahu. It's like Benjamin Netanyahu prefers Trump, well, like Israelis at large really prefer Trump. It's like they think that Trump's going to give them more. And it's like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I saw.
What could
Yeah.
that's the thing that drove me crazy is like, what could you possibly get that you're not getting already?
hmm
Other than this is the thing that everybody needs now is, it's very much Zionists more than anybody, I think, but I think a lot of demographics, MAGA has this, liberals have this, are guilty of. It's like it's not enough for me to get everything I want. I have to be praised for it as well. That's the thing that like Zionists are the biggest perpetrators of this. Is like it's like they get everything they ever want, and they're still not happy about it because they also need to be heroes and victims at the same
hmm
time.
Mhm.
So that's why no amount of aid, no amount of support is ever going to be satisfying if that's the way you look at it.
I agree with everything you just said. I do kind of want to tie this back in with Biden because I think that's where we
Yeah, yeah,
started.
Mhm.
Uh,
yeah.
so the ceasefire happened kind of in between. Biden was still president, but clearly like the most lamest of ducks you could possibly be. It happened like I think a week before the inauguration. So clearly like Trump had a big push in,
And it was,
to get
yeah,
it done.
it
It
was
wouldn't have happened
brokered.
without.
It
It
was
was
the
brokered by Trump's guy
it was
that
the
kind of,
Iranian hostage situation right before Reagan
yeah.
took office.
Yeah,
It meant
which
to
are
mimic
more
that.
more generous to Biden than they were to Carter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had quite a few people asking me about this, and they were thinking it was a Iran hostage crisis type situation.
I think it's meant to mimic that.
Very late October surprise, right?
Yeah.
I have
Unnecessary
a
October surprise. It
Yeah. Well, I have a hard time believing that just for the simple fact of how we saw Biden conduct himself for the entire year and a half, or the entire year leading up to it, which is there was no strong arming pushing for a ceasefire. So if you're going
Which
to
we found out could
believe
have happened the entire time.
yeah, exactly. If you're going to believe that that was the case, then you'd have to believe that Biden was doing absolutely everything in his power to get the deal done, and he just couldn't. And I
No,
cannot bring
I don't
myself
believe
to the
that.
place mentally to believe that for a fucking second.
Not me either. No, and that's why we shouldn't forgive him. But I do think it was kind of a smart play from Netanyahu's standpoint, just because he knew we were in American election cycle. It was about
Yeah.
the exact
Yeah.
time. It
Yeah.
was like one full year from October 7th to the next October, which was like the final push for
Hmm.
our election. So, but like that, I mean, personally, if I were Biden, I'd be like, you're pulling this shit during an election. Like, I'm gonna be really hard on you
Yeah.
because you're doing that. That is like a very aggressive thing to like put on the table of like an American politician. And it's like you could, and Netanyahu's just trying to save his own skin too. Like he's got a
Yeah.
lot of legal trouble that's waiting for him at the end of this.
But Biden would only put that pressure on if he didn't think it was a good thing. I mean,
Yeah.
ideologically,
Politically,
but no, I mean, ideologically,
you think
Biden
he did this out
is,
of ideology?
he's been an ardent Zionist his entire career for whatever fucking reason. I don't know why.
They
Um,
got something on
but
him?
yeah, probably. Yeah. There's an
Inclination.
Epstein. Yeah, there's a Mossad Epstein file on him too somewhere.
Imagine if they let the Hunter stuff out, like that's not the bad stuff. Like wait, the crack and hookers and underage kids, that was the stuff you were willing to let go?
Honestly, looking at, the career of Joe, I mean, the things that that guy has been willing to endorse in his public career has
Yeah,
been
true.
on the wrong side of American history at every turn. So I could not fathom what his dirty secrets would be. I don't
Yeah.
want to know. I don't want to know what sick, depraved stuff goes on behind closed doors if we've seen what his public life is.
I want to pull this back to the buyer's remorse and
Yeah.
Trump. In both of your media spheres, are you seeing third party voters or Trump voters regret either not voting or voting for Trump at this point?
Well, remember, I'm in England, so I'm only seeing what I see online. One of my favorite kind of posts that you see online is the definitely fake Trump voting neighbor. This is like a brand of tweet or a Facebook post that comes up a lot of like, my Trump voting neighbor just said to me, I can't believe my Medicaid's going to be cut back or whatever. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
This is
it's
what I
this
was gonna bring up, yeah.
yeah, it's
I have a
like
good one
they're
too.
like yeah, like the mythical neighbor or like gas station worker who you talk tariffs with. It's like
Yeah.
no one talks.
I was building my second house and then the laborers were all taken away.
Yeah, I didn't know all my strawberries got got picked by migrant workers. Now I can't afford strawberries. Yeah, that's my favorite brand of mega buyer's remorse is these phantom people who tell their neighbors
Yeah.
about their mistakes in voting. As far as third party voters, myself included, no. This happened after 2016 too. I remember really clearly of like, oh, I hope you're happy now. Don't you, I think it's the proverbial them winning an argument in the shower of like Democratic voters being mad at some sort of mythical leftist, where it's like, I don't think you're going to find any third party voter, whether they're a leftist or a libertarian or whatever, who you're ever going to shame into voting the way they did because they fundamentally like on a moral level are against either
Hmm.
party or the system.
It was a
Um,
conscious choice
so,
to go out and vote,
yeah, so
not
it's
just not
like
show up.
it's a
Yeah.
thing that happens every election. I don't understand the point of even because you don't respect these people enough to try and curry their favor to get a vote. Aside from, Republicans will go more for the libertarian vote. But the Dems just, and I think this last election was proof positive of they wanted to dunk on the left. They wanted to win in spite of these people not coming along with them. I think that's
Mhm.
why you
Yeah.
saw some of the actions of the Dems campaigning or lack thereof in Michigan, and especially like Bill Clinton coming there and giving that insane speech about like, hey, I know like your whole family's dead, but King David gave this land to the Jews, so deal with it, vote for Harris, if you remember that. But no, I don't think there's going to be any third party buyer's remorse because, and again, you were voting against a party that was actively doing the Holocaust. So any amount of, I'm sorry if you're gonna, yeah, I know that things are fundamentally worst under Trump in many, many ways. But if you can't draw the line at that, if you can't draw the line at a genocide, I don't care about your opinion on literally any other issue. If you can't draw a line there, I don't care what your labor policies are or what your healthcare policies are. If you're willing to do a genocide, and I think there's a lot of the people who voted that way feel the same way. So no, you're never going to get people to have buyer's remorse in that regard.
There's like a hierarchy of needs in terms of policy. Like if genocide's okay, I don't care about your health care plans. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, do you agree with that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think for some people, I think I'm different. I think although I think it's like really important, I just know there would be no change when Trump comes in or if Trump were in office when this happened.
Hmm.
So to me, it's like there is no other choice, and I just see practically other policies that are much worse. I went into this and I'm like, okay, I just don't want to give Trump another three Supreme Court justices. Like that's all it is to me.
Hmm.
Everything else I knew is going to be kind of like a lame duck on if Harris won, and then like she wouldn't get anything actually done. She'd just be like the whipping boy again for right-wing media, and then Trump actually would get shit done, and I would just rather put it into a stalemate. And there's at least hope that outside of an election cycle, the Dems would ease up, or not ease up, rather, they would be more strict with Israel. But we'll never know.
Do either of you think that there will be a change in policy by the Democrats? I'd say maybe specific to Israel, since that's been the focus of the conversation.
Could I reword your question? Do you think
Sure.
Dems are
Yeah.
gonna learn anything from this last election?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
no, I don't. But
No, I mean we already saw that with who's that shithead who's the new chair of the DNC who
oh, did they decide on one?
Yeah, they elected them last night, I think.
Yeah.
Ken Martin.
yeah, I think it was him was saying we want the good billionaires, not the bad billionaires.
Hmm.
If that doesn't sum up the Democratic Party's thinking at large, I don't know what does. They haven't learned a fucking thing. For a long time, I've thought that the Democrats are you kind of want to lose. They'd rather be the controlled opposition. And I
Mm.
think that's half true. I think the Democrats are okay with losing. I don't think it bothers them that much, the establishment of them, because why would it? Here in England, if someone fucks up, they resign. They're out of a job. I mean, you go back into the private sector or whatever, but like you leave in disgrace. Actually, that doesn't happen in US politics. I don't think they necessarily want to lose. They don't mind if they lose. They'd rather lose than cede any ground to the left. But if they're going to win, they want to win completely on their own terms. They want to win by doing the thing that they're doing. They want to win their way. And I don't see that changing. And but I do see, people changing and no one fucking likes their way. So I don't see a way forward. I think for the next election, I think probably it's going to be enough of a disaster with Trump unless none of us understand tariffs and this actually is great for America. Actually,
I
does
actually
become-
think Trump is gonna come out on top with the tariffs.
I don't know.
putting it
I-
out there now.
I mean,
My
American
$1 million
soft
bet
power-
to you guys.
The American
Well,
soft power is our economy, and I don't know. It's gonna be painful. I don't know what
Yeah.
we're gonna get out of it. He did this last time too with farmers, and they were like, "Well, it's gonna hurt, but I just trust him." So
Well, and then they also got
Yeah.
the a payout because of it. They got a federal
they got subsidies.
yeah, they got subsidies.
Farmers always get subsidies, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Well,
another problem.
Unlike the rest of the country, I'm willing to admit that I do not understand the argument behind tariffs. I don't know. I have no idea whether it'll be good or bad. It sounds bad, but I didn't study economics. I'm willing to bet that either way, Trump's out after this term, right? I don't think anyone's going to take up the MAGA mantle like him. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want a successor. What's going to be JD Vance? He's probably going to have already thrown JD Vance under the bus
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
times by the end of this term, like everybody else. I mean, look how he conducts business. So there's a good chance the Dems are going to be back in power again, and they're just going to do this again. No, I don't think they'll learn anything. I don't think they want to.
No, I don't think they're gonna learn anything. I think the only way it's gonna change is if there's like a charismatic person within the party, not Gavin Newsom,
Yeah.
who someone better than Gavin Newsom, and they're gonna have to talk about social economic issues, but I don't think that the party's there. I think that they would rather lose than hand that over.
I think seen very clearly that they suck ass at talent spotting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do not know how to pick winners.
And although like, you could argue that Trump is like the right wing Obama, like he's very
Yeah.
telegenic and checks all the boxes in that regard, but media savvy. I think they tried to tell everyone that everyone was in love with Kamala, and that wasn't enough. It needs to be like an organic thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe people do need to fall in love with a presidential candidate, but I do think policy is enough. Like like economic policy, like social economic policy is enough for people to fall in love. We yearn for it in America because we have such terrible
Yeah, but they'll
policy.
never do that. They want
I
to
know.
find a way to do it without that because they had
Yeah.
that with Bernie Sanders.
Mhm.
Yeah, they had the option. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but that they want someone who's just so charismatic and awesome that they
Mhm.
can get away with still doing their shitty policies and just bewitch people with their charm.
So they'll probably put like a Pete out there or
Oh yeah.
something. They'll
Okay.
like anoint
Yeah.
him.
Well, there's the new talk is Fetterman.
Yeah.
That would be the
Yeah.
absolute worst choice. So, but I'm gonna give him VP. I don't think they'll be ballsy
I
enough to
could
do
I,
Fetterman.
I could see Fetterman being VP if
I,
he stays. He looks like the bad guy from the Popeye cartoons.
I I wanted to restart this podcast simply to start an organic movement to recall Fetterman. So anybody in Pennsylvania listening, this is your clarion call.
Oh, I hate him so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
did you guys see I think it was on CNN, this contributor was talking about how who the Democrats need, it's the constant conversation now is what do we need? What can we put forward that's going to beat MAGA? And she was saying that it's got to be Fetterman, because he speaks his mind and he's rough around the edges and he's Trump-like. And sure, the base doesn't love him, but
I've never
he's
heard him
the guy.
speak. I've never heard him
I
speak.
actually
The base doesn't love him, but he's the guy. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's the mantra.
Yeah.
And no
that
one loves him.
Yeah, again, that is, if that's not Democrats summed up for you. Sure, the
Like
base doesn't love him, but he's our guy. It's unbelievable.
the idea of a base is wrong. People can flip.
Mhm.
People are not locked
Yep.
in. Like
Yeah.
learn that lesson, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
just
I
to
think
just to emphasize that point, like if you have someone who is a base, they're going to vote for your party. They're partisan.
yeah.
They pushed it way too far by like assuming certain minorities and age groups are gonna just fall in line.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Park. I don't think they have a base. The base that they used to have, they continually keep alienating, which is supposed to be working class people and especially people of color, minority groups. But their way of speaking to that base that used to be very strong and is actually still very strong, it's just not strong enough for them to be happy, is to scold these people, like particularly what the Dems were doing in the last election to black men,
Hmm.
which is like coming and wagging their finger and telling them not to be woman
Sexist.
haters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I know all you woman haters.
it's like stop hating women and we will give you weed and crypto. Fall in line.
That and
Yeah.
that is that's not hyperbole. They
That's
they
literally
really
what they
pivoted
did.
hard into weed and crypto.
Oh, so that's what Fetterman said?
No, that's
No, that's
what
what Kamala Harris
Kamala
said.
picked up. She's like, "Fuck, we're losing the black man. Let's give him weed and crypto."
Jeez.
I mean, she
That would
didn't. It was pretty 1-to-1 though. It's like a poll came out, and then she's like, "Fuck." All
that
right.
was her, yeah, that was her policy was like, I don't know, it was some sort of like, we will give you mentors Like,
Oh, I didn't see that part. I just
yeah,
remember the
yeah.
ads that came out. It's like, we'll fund your crypto businesses.
Yeah, it was something about marijuana legislation, some sort of like mentorship program for, I guess, grown men, like treating them like they're in fucking high school. Like we're going to give
It's
you a
weird.
guidance counselor, and yeah, crypto and weed.
This goes back to something that I talked about in the last episode. I just think the right has ideas. The left has no new idea. Well, I hate to even call them the left or the right.
Yeah.
Republicans came with ideas. Democrats have zero ideas that I've seen so far.
Republicans have ideas and they have enemies, and
And they're willing to bomb
and
pro.
they have a hilarious leader who spits fire and
Yeah.
is very fun.
Spits out fire. Oh, yeah. Someone did send this to me. So
Yeah.
funny.
Okay, so this is from Oklahoma's News 4. Okay.
It's actually from the Hill,
K4.
republished.
Okay. Republished from the Hill. Headline: Google Maps to rename Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. Just a quick thing. Google said on Monday that it will change the name of Gulf of America to, or Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America in Google Maps once it is updated in the U.S. geographic name system. Oh, and Google Maps will also change the name of Denali in Alaska to Mount McKinley. I have to ask, what the fuck? I did not hear any of this shit about Denali and Mount McKinley. And then, like, when Trump got into office, that was like a big, was that something he was running on? I don't understand.
I,
No.
yeah.
Was
I
he,
didn't
Is
know
there,
that.
he said it during the campaign?
The only time I heard him say it was the inauguration.
yeah, that came out of
Yeah,
nowhere
yeah.
for me. I mean, we know that everything Trump does is like a, very New York business practice, quid pro quo, right? So who the fuck are like the diehard William McKinley fans that were really pissed about this mountain in fucking Alaska? I'm still bewildered by that.
That
So,
one's a jab at Obama because
yep.
Obama officially changed the name. That's all that is. It's just vindictive.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
So
right.
I was reading about Trump's love of McKinley. He was known as like an imperial president, right? I think he was
Mhm.
involved in the Spanish-American War. He did love tariffs. He also got Hawaii, I believe, for the United States, annexed Hawaii for the United States. So the talk of the Greenland annexation, possibly Canada, is some
Yeah.
parallels that they've been
It's
drawing.
on brand. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like fit that ethos of just taking land, I guess.
It's again, you would never, if this was 2016, 2017, when in Trump's first term, I don't think Google would have folded like this. I think they would have kept it Gulf of Mexico. I think they would have kept it Denali. Their rationale and responses. We received a few questions about naming within Google Maps. We, as Google, have a long-standing policy of practice of applying name changes when they have been updated in official government sources. I don't think the tech industry would have folded like this. It again just proves that when any resistance that we saw in Trump's first term has turned into resignation.
Well, in fairness, these tech companies don't care one way or another. I mean, they're going to do whatever's going to smooth the path for them and have, as little amount of legislation and oversight going towards their companies as possible. So
Yeah.
the idea that any of these tech giants have somehow become like actually MAGA or like conservative, I think is the wrong way to look at it. I
No,
think they're just going that's pure bottom line thinking. I think yeah. So
I agree
and
with you, but I just want to say this. I do think there would have been like a revolt in the user base or their employees would have freaked out. Like, if Jordan Peterson had a new book come out in 2018 or whatever, remember there's like mass resignations from people or, there wasn't going to be any marketing put behind it. I don't see that happening in the same way in 2025.
yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Back to Mount McKinley. First, just I gotta say, maybe it's just because I remember I think it was the Lincoln Denali, which was a big ass
Mhm. SUV, right?
SUV back
Yeah,
when
they're
we were
renaming that
kids.
as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. It's gonna be the McKinley. Denali's a sick sounding name. They should have. That's much more majestic if you're naming a mountain. Mount McKinley. I mean,
So
Yeah.
it's an
yeah,
L.
that's an L.
That's a
That's an
hard
L.
L for sure.
Yeah, that's a hard L. Denali's got so much more. Denali sounds regal and
I want to
majestic.
climb that. I don't want to climb
Yeah,
on top of Mr. McKinley.
yeah.
Okay, next gut reaction.
The Gulf of Mexico thing though is a little funny of like again show like conservatives and MAGA people just showing what charlatans they are when it comes to like names and
Yeah.
titles
Surface level
matter.
shit.
Yeah, surface level, like the same amount of bitching that they do about pronouns, but they're like, it should be the Gulf of America. It's just like showing that they're just as big of pussies as like the phantom blue-haired uh poli-sci student. So
Yep.
I just think that's so like they're like, yeah, it should, it's like, oh yeah, that thing you cared so much about. Like it was really burning you up inside that the Gulf of Mexico wasn't called the Gulf of America. Grow up.
This is
Uh,
along a target on their renaming list.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this also ties back to what we were talking about, like the phantom, like na the neighbor who regrets his, no, they're stoked on this. They love the renaming. I prefer Canada,
Yeah.
United States, Mexico.
Yeah, come.
That's
Gulf of Cum is
it's more
the obvious
inclusive.
Yeah,
choice.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is better.
Yeah, it's the obvious choice. Uh, I was going to say
It can't
something and
cost
I
that
lost
much
it.
to lobby the administration to get it to be renamed Gulf of Cum, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We'll
All of
check the
this should
account.
be, yeah, all of this should just be voted on crowdsource style. But yeah, I mean, the Gulf of America thing, the reason it's like the base loves it is just this is why MAGA works. This is why MAGA's winning and it's the same with the DEI thing from the base is they don't really have an end game other than owning libs. That's
Yeah.
what they
Yeah, that's the
like. They
policy. Yeah.
just they and the fact that Democrats haven't like caught up to that yet is really astounding. It's just like they're just dunking on you. That
Yep.
they don't really they
It
don't
works
this
because
is
there's a good enemy, right? That's like what you're saying.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and it's like it's fun to be MAGA and it's never fun to be a Dem. And
Hmm.
that's something that like no one can really get their wrap their minds around. It's just that like people like being MAGA right now because it's fun. It's the party is now.
Mhm.
Whereas with the Dems, it's like, no, we got to do this and this and this procedure, and then you get to have a nice time.
It's very true, though. I mean, people just want anyone in power. It was so lame to see like the Dims bow down to Joe Manchin, be like, but we just can't do it.
Yeah.
He
And
was such
then,
a scapegoat, right?
and there was one thing they wanted done, and then there was like some clerk that was like, no, actually, you can't do it that way.
Oh yeah, the
And they're like, and
parliamentarian
Joe
that
Biden's
would.
like, damn,
I think it
guys,
Yeah.
was
we could
the
have
fifty
given that to
dollar
you,
minimum
but
wage, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Student
it was,
debt,
The
all
parl
of it,
I
all of
think it
it.
was
the
student
Yeah,
debt,
parliamentarian.
right?
parliamentarian. The
Hmm.
parliamentarian came up during the Bush years too, I think, and they just fired him because it's not an elected position. It's just some nerd with a book who's like, that's
Yeah.
not allowed.
John Stewart has a good bit on norms. I think he actually brings that up, and it's just like the exact reason why the Democrats fucking suck and why they failed. Back to this Iglesias guy. Like he was right about that. He was like they didn't crystallize the norms in code when they could have, and now Trump's way more powerful because
Yep.
they didn't do shit. Yeah.
Yep.
In
Yeah.
terms of like ensuring, if they were really worried about him coming in and becoming a dictator, it's like, well, why didn't you and reinforce the law a little bit?
Do more shit when you're in power. If you're just gonna be ringing the alarm bell of all the horrible shit that he's gonna do, then do it yourself.
Hmm.
Okay, I got one. It's a cheap shot, but I'm gonna send this to the Discord.
RFK Jr. is a predator who put mice in blender to feed to hawks. Caroline Kennedy says Trump's pick for the health secretary misrepresents, lies, and cheats his way through life. I mean, That's fucking cool. I don't know why you would need to blend. Why would you need to blend the mice though for a hawk? I mean, don't they just eat them
This
whole?
is the only thing I care about from this, because obviously there's been all this dumb infighting between the Kennedy family, which also is another big L, I think, for Democrats, is like, do you know this other Kennedy
Yeah.
Mm.
says that he's bad? And it's like, I don't know, it's like if a buddy, it's like if a friend of mine's friend was like, you know, his cousin doesn't like him though, right? And be like,
Yeah,
okay.
it's giving Mary Trump.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
some other fucking rich trust fund asshole who I don't care about has a bad opinion. But yeah, I guess I just love that they put this in the headline that because they're obviously trying to have an evocation of Robert F. Kennedy taking a bunch of live mice, throwing them in a blender and
Yeah.
making,
Wait,
I
do you
guess, a
think it was his
smoothie.
kitchen blender?
That is the question. Does he have a specific blender for the Hawks and one for the kitchen?
His smoothies. Yeah.
And honestly, knowing what we know about
His love of
uh
blood.
and his well,
Wild animal blood.
he's
He'd
just
lick
weird.
the blender blade after. He's like, that's a good batch.
Ah. Well, Dan, you mentioned this before, like I think like a year ago, back when RFK was still running as an independent, that, you know, obviously all of these media stories coming out about him again and again and again were clearly, you know, hit pieces. And we talk about
Mhm.
this in the interview with Lisa later about, you know, the close relationship between the deep state, the CIA, and the State Department, and legacy media. But and I think while that's very true, that there was a concerted effort to do hit pieces on RFK. The fact remains that man has way too many bizarre
Mhm.
dead animal related stories
Yeah.
that it's like I can only put so much blame on the CIA at a certain point.
Yeah.
It's at some point you got to show a little personal responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
For being a hero, he's the most active heroin addict I've ever heard of, though.
I really didn't know the
Prolific.
heroin thing was the reason for the voice.
Yeah, he did it for like 15 years. He said it made him better at reading, which, you know,
Maybe.
I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum.
I'm gonna give it a try one day.
What
If it
phrase
works
is
for you.
not going to yuck anybody's yum? Where is that from? You need to come back
I,
down from England.
Yeah, my quick one though, yeah, so what I'm assuming happens is that he's making some sort of hawk feed, right? I mean, it's like
yeah.
I'm imagining it's like a smoothie, you know, you get your frozen blueberries, you blend them up,
Right, right.
mix it with some kefir or something, some probiotic.
I don't think but like a hawk wouldn't eat a soup. How does that work? Their beak is not built for that.
Okay, well maybe you
Or
take out the
Then he forms
probiotic.
it.
I
Then he forms. Yeah, you're right. You're right. The probiotic was a little too far.
he forms it into like little popsicles like you do for babies with breast milk.
so it's
There
just
you
for
go.
him. It's his blend.
All right, so what's our vote on this?
A
Is
W or an
this
L?
is this a W or an L for RFK?
It sounds like he's raising weak hawks to me. I just can't get over this hawk can't eat raw mice. So,
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
paddle your own
actually,
canoe.
then it's a W for me because if he's like rehabilitating them,
okay. All right,
W.
Dan, you
Domesticate,
went there.
yeah,
You know I'm an
better.
animal lover.
Yep,
You turned
yep,
this L into a W real
yep, yep.
fast.
I'm I'm gonna say W. It's an alpha move.
Hmm.
Yep.
Because this means he's trying to find a mice delivery service that's even more effective than eating them one at a time. They're slipping them down. So I think he's making extra alpha hawks.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's a W.
Bill Maher calls China the new Islam. Says left can't be honest about them because they are not white. Oh, this guy's so fucking geriatric. It's really painful.
Jesus fucking Christ. Well, again, you know, looking forward to our interview. Bill Maher's probably a deep state operative or like adjacent at this point with the amount of Islamophobic peddling he's done over his entire career, also feeding into the whole DEI thing of,
And
you know,
he's anti-China, I guess. I don't, the
because
anti-China
he's
thing is just so
yeah,
crazy to me. But yeah,
yeah, he's such a dumb piece of shit.
yeah.
Fuck him.
That article read to me like it was more him blaming the left for being so woke that we couldn't blame Chinese people because they're people of color, right? And that so
Right.
that makes them the new safety group
Islam.
on the left. Yeah, and it used to be Islam, but now it's China, and
It was Islam at one point because
I don't
I'm
know.
not gonna. I'll ask a Muslim person how they feel about that.
Xi
They,
Jinping is
they
like a
weren't shit on.
non-binary icon for the Zoomer generation now in the eyes of Bill Maher. I hate him so much.
Hey, Ben, Andrew, who do you guys talk to this week?
So, this week we sat down with author, historian, and researcher Lisa Pease. Lisa Pease is the author of the excellent book A Lie Too Big to Fail, which explores the assassination of RFK Sr. Lisa was also the author of, I believe it's The Assassinations. Lisa is an expert on political assassinations, presidential assassinations, particularly from the era of the 1960s. So she's done a lot of great work, not only on RFK Sr., but also JFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, as well as lots of foreign leaders as well. Great. So yeah, I thought we could just kind of jump into it. If that's all right. I will try as best I can, Lisa, to let you not be interrupted by me, but I think I speak for Andrew as well, that when it comes to this topic of political assassinations and MK Ultra and all of this stuff, I could talk, I could bend your ear for about 12 hours if you allow me to.
And
So I'm
vice
gonna
versa, I'm sure.
yeah, I'm gonna try to restrain myself as best I can. But yeah, just to jump into it, in light of the new Trump presidency and his one of his many executive orders being about disclosing all the remaining documents on RFK, JFK, and MLK. I thought who better to speak to than you, and you've also in your work talked about how understanding the past is a great way to understand what's going on in our present. So I thought it would be a great, and I tend to agree that looking back at the way, especially the CIA was operating back at that time, kind of serves as an analog for what we can expect they're still doing today. Lisa, you wrote the wonderful book A Lie Too Big to Fail, which documents the murder of RFK, which I'll have to say, I think like many, I knew close to little about until I found your book, and I think a lot of people know about the lore and the conspiracy behind the JFK killing, but I think a lot less people know about RFK and MLK. And I wonder if maybe you could just start off there of what the story was and what are the what is the through line? What are the similarities between these three cases?
Yes, and when you say three cases, I assume you mean Martin Luther King as well, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And we could also put in Malcolm X, which obviously didn't make it into
Yes.
the executive order. I don't know why, but
Yes, and Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN secretary, who was also killed in 1961 for, I believe, many of the same reasons that JFK was killed. Bottom line, people who advocate peace in times of war are not very popular, especially with intelligence agencies. The intelligence agencies, their glory days are when we're fighting some big enemy, and the Cold War was like, glory times for them. Every time they could thwart the Soviet Union in some way, that was a big win for them. And, Kennedy got in the way of that. Martin Luther King didn't want to be at war in Vietnam, so that was a problem for them. And of course, RFK had originally been a proponent of the CIA's type of covert action, both in Cuba and in Vietnam. But by the time he was running for president, he had realized that was a huge mistake. And he owned his responsibility for that. And he's like, look, I was part of the forces calling for war, and I see now this is a horrible thing, and we should not have this war. And, that's one of the main reasons he ran was to try to stop the Vietnam War from escalating any further. And it's important for your listeners to understand because JFK is often blamed for starting the Vietnam War, and he really didn't. He sent advisors, not soldiers. Now, when it turned out the advisors were flying helicopters and maybe shooting at people, that was not what Kennedy had approved. That's what the CIA was doing without his knowledge. But there really wasn't a wider war until LBJ took office. And Kennedy, at the time of his assassination, had already called for the withdrawal of the first 1,000 troops and planned a phased withdrawal through his second term, assuming he got elected. And he didn't talk about it to the public much because he was very worried he wouldn't get reelected if he talked about withdrawing troops in the run-up to the election. He never wanted to be seen as soft on communism, and he had no sympathy for communism, but he had great sympathy for nations choosing their own political path. And he was unique in that regard because every president kind of before and since, with a couple of exceptions, Jimmy Carter being a notable one. In any case, Martin Luther King was not killed for civil rights or anything like that. I mean, he was kind of the favorite until he started taking an anti-war stance. And King knew that that was risking his life, and he did it anyway. So, I'm so grateful to those who speak up for peace, even at great cost to themselves. And of course, RFK knew for certain he could be killed because his brother already had been, and he knew he was challenging the exact same forces. So let's give you a quick overview because most people, like you say, aren't familiar with the case. The official story is that after winning the California primary, Kennedy walked through a kitchen hallway, a little pantry area en route to the press room. A Palestinian immigrant stepped out and killed him in full view of everyone. He was the only guy, again, in quotes, because that's not true, but the press said he was the only guy with a gun in the room, and therefore he shot Kennedy. Now, the huge problem with that is that Sirhan was here and RFK was here, and they were facing each other. So, how does RFK get hit from behind the right ear if Sirhan's standing here? His arm is not 10 feet long, can't wrap around. And so people say, oh, well, Kennedy turned and that's when Sirhan lunged in. But the problem with that is we have witnesses who never took their eyes off of Kennedy, and we have a good 4 witnesses who saw them both at the same time. And those 4 witnesses described exactly the same thing, facing each other with the gun muzzle about 3 feet from Kennedy's head. And yet Kennedy was shot behind his right ear from a distance of not more than an inch and a half, according to Thomas Noguchi, who reiterated that years later. In his book, he actually says 3 inches. I blame that on his co-writer because there was great pressure. There was a huge amount of pressure brought on Thomas Noguchi, the coroner, to widen that to 3 feet. And he's like, I can't do that, and so, 3 inches was still better than 1 inch, which was what he originally said. And he allowed up to an inch and a half. Yeah.
So was that verified by eyewitnesses, or was that something that was like forensically, like there were burns behind?
Forensically, yes. There was stippling the soot. When a gun is very close, it leaves a little soot. And what he and actually Dwayne Wolfer, the LAPD's criminalist, did is they got a bunch of dead pig ears and put them on boards and fired at them from point blank range and then backing up, a little bit at a time. And he felt that at the 1 to the 1.5 inch mark was the exact pattern match of how much powder, because if you're 3 feet away, there's no powder at all. So somebody shot RFK from point blank range, and therefore it couldn't have been Sirhan, who was so many feet away. And I wondered how they got away with that at the trial. I'm like, why didn't the jurors pick up on this? And they did something very clever. They put a map up kind of the room, but they used these squares that represented 2 feet each. So they could literally put Sirhan and Kennedy, within one square of each other. And the assumption is that they're touching in
Yeah.
the middle when in fact they're on the outer edges. And of course, the jury was not given any of the additional information. And his defense team did know about the issue. Robert Blair Kaiser told me, look, I wrote a letter to Cooper and I said there's a serious problem here based on the autopsy evidence and what else. And according to Kaiser, I have no way to verify this, but according to him, Cooper said, well, if he's part of the conspiracy at all, he's still guilty, so why even bring it up? And that's where, as you both know, the mind control angle comes in because you have to prove in court, or you're supposed to prove in court, the intention to commit the crime, mens rea. It's not enough to commit a crime. If it's accidental, that's very different than if it's deliberate. And in my book, I spend a whole chapter on mind control. And it wasn't just the CIA experimenting with it. It was the Navy, the Army, the Marines, every facet of the military had their own mind control operations. And many of them were joint operations, including with the CIA. And one of the operations that the CIA did in the 50s was called Operation Artichoke, or Project Artichoke, really. And that they described in there, can we get a person of redacted nationality to commit an act of attempted assassination as part of a wider plot, basically? And that sounds exactly what happened. And when I looked into Sirhan, originally I didn't know if he was guilty or not. I didn't know if he had shot or not. And what I really focused on the ballistics and the eyewitnesses. And when I realized, well, he couldn't have shot him, so why was he firing at all? What was he doing? And it wasn't until Dan Brown's transcripts came out. Now, Dan Brown is a hypnosis expert who's testified at many trials and used to teach, at Ivy League universities and wrote one of the current textbooks on hypnosis. And Sirhan's lawyer, Bill Pepper, allowed him access to Sirhan. And he spent 60 hours over a couple of years with him. And in that time, he got Sirhan to remember a little bit more about what had happened in the pantry. Now, interestingly enough, backtracking for a second, Sirhan's original defense team also brought in hypnotists because they too felt that he had been hypnotized. But here's how they questioned him. Sirhan, there, Robert Kennedy is coming into the room. Do you see that, Sirhan? Sirhan, pull out your gun. Sirhan, do you remember that? I mean, it's like they're trying to plant a memory.
Very leading him, yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, any lawyer who sees that goes, that's crazy. That should never have been allowed.
Like a forced confession.
Yeah.
But what Dan Brown did, of course, was totally different. Sirhan, what do you see? Who's near you? Is there anything happening to your left? What's going on to your right? What do you see? And it turns out that Sirhan was in the company of a girl in a white polka dot dress, a white dress with dark polka dots, which I have like 20 witnesses who saw Sirhan in the company of a girl in a white dress with dark polka dots. And the girl had led him into the pantry, and he thought he was going to get lucky that night. He was sexually aroused. He was flirting with her. She put him up on a tray stand that would have been facing the door where RFK would have been coming in. And standing up on the tray stand elevated them both because she got up behind him on the tray stand. That gave you a little bit of an elevated room, elevated view of the room so they could maybe see when RFK came in. And Sirhan remembers them being up on the tray stand. He remembers her looking up to her right, which to me was fascinating because I've been living in that pantry for many years virtually, and I know that up and to the right would have been somebody standing on the table. And there were 4 credible witnesses who described a shooter shooting down while standing on the table, which is fascinating too, because again, people know of Sirhan's gun. Most people know, if they know anything about the case, they've heard the name Thane Eugene Caesar, who was a security guard who was at Kennedy's right elbow, basically, leading him through the pantry. And Caesar's a fascinating character who ended up, it seems he worked for the CIA. There's good evidence now. So you have at least 3 shooters in the room, a guy on the table, Sirhan, and then the guy right behind Kennedy, who's actually in a good position to shoot him from behind. But anyway, so the girl looks up to the right, and I believe when she did that, she was checking with the shooter to see if Robert Kennedy had come in yet, because at some point that person again would have had a really great view because they're way above the heads of the crowd now. As she gets some sort of signal and then pulls Sirhan to the middle of the room. Now again, this is what Sirhan remembers in hypnosis. He goes, and then she pinched me a certain way in, like his shoulder, and then he's like, and then I was back at the shooting range. Now he'd spent like 6 hours at a shooting range earlier that day. He'd actually been a target shooter since his days in ROTC. It was just something he enjoyed. A lot of people like going out and firing at targets. Sirhan did. That might have been where somebody spotted him the first time. Who knows? He is now seeing targets in front of him. And people seize on comments that one witness heard, like somebody heard him say, "What's he doing here?" And that could have been anyone. It could have been a friend of his. It could have been Robert Kennedy. It could have been Thane Caesar, who he had reason to possibly know in advance. But whatever he saw, I don't think we should jump to the conclusion that he was referring to Robert Kennedy. Now, this hypnotic illusion, I probably wouldn't have believed that or understood it had I not had a personal encounter with somebody in the grip of a hypnotic illusion. When I was doing that chapter, I went to as many hypnosis shows as I could for like a 2 year period. I really looked into it and, watched people like before and after, but, I didn't know anybody who had been hypnotized, so it was tough. And then one show, I ended up sitting next to a woman and talking to her for about 20 minutes, perfectly normal, nice, next door neighbor type gal. And, then she went up on stage as a volunteer, and it turned out she was highly hypnotizable. And the guy put her in a trance and told her she'd won like a $35,000 check. And she jumped around as you would expect and whatever. The show ends. He tells them all they're unhypnotized, but they're not. And a different hypnosis show I'd gone to, the hypnotist had warned us when they come off the stage, give them a little space. Don't talk to them too much for the next 24 hours. And I'm like, what? Because I had
24.
seen him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
wow.
it's like he had, because he too had given them a command like, you're all unhypnotized now, but they weren't. And at that show, the guy had that I saw went up to his friends and they were joking because the hypnotist got him to propose to his girlfriend. He's like, I didn't. He's like, I wasn't hypnotized. I was playing along. And they're like, so was that a real proposal? He's like, what are you talking about? They're like, you proposed to your girlfriend. He's like, no, I didn't. So no memory of the hypnosis. He thinks he's out of it, but there's some part of it that's still in it, and literally no memory of what had just happened. And so with this woman, it was similar. I went up to her after the show. I talked to the hypnotist, and then when the crowd parted, she was still there. I'm like, great, I'll go talk to her. And she looked a little upset, and I'm like, are you okay? I thought maybe she'd lost her family or something, and she's like, well, I have to give this back. And she's holding what's like play money, like Monopoly play money or something. And I'm like, you don't have to give that back. It's just play money. I'm sure he doesn't care. And she goes, no, it's a $35,000 check. And I'm like, oh my God. I like froze. And I'm like, I wonder if I can get her to see what's really there. I'm like, can I hold it with you? Can we look a little closer? Do you see this number circled up in the right-hand corner? And she goes, it's a $35,000 check, and I have to give it back. And I couldn't shake her from it. And I left that totally freaked out because I'd never really seen somebody in the grip of a hypnotic illusion before. And most people haven't, or if they have, they're not aware that they have. But I was, certainly aware that this woman was seeing something that wasn't there. So having had that experience, when I read that in Dan Brown's transcript of his session with Sirhan, it actually made perfect sense. Of course, he's given a command that he's probably been given many times before, and now he thinks he's back at the target range. He's pulling out a gun and he's firing. Now, here's the other thing. None of the bullets in Kennedy, and Kennedy was shot 4 times, only 3 entered his body. One went through his coat. One shot was behind the right ear, but there were 3 more shots kind of in the under the arm area that went kind of across his back. And again, Sirhan couldn't have made those either since they're facing each other. But those three shots, Thane Caesar was in the perfect position to move because Caesar was very tall. He was like 6'2", and Robert Kennedy was like 5'9". So if Caesar had pulled out his gun and shot him in the head, a lot of people would have seen that. But if he was shooting him under the arm while he was already holding him anyway and standing very close to him, no one would have seen that, and that would have been easy. There are witnesses who saw a different shooter go up to Kennedy's head. Yeah, a guy in a white busboy outfit, and I was able to talk to one of them. One of them I couldn't, Freddie Plimpton, the wife of George Plimpton, who, by the way, was a CIA asset for years and one of the first people to tackle Sirhan. But it was his wife who had been at an earlier event when Kennedy, there were fireworks that went off in a Chinese New Year's parade. It's Chinese New Year's like right now, this week. And people were shooting off fireworks and they all thought it was gunshots. And she was like, oh my God, if those had been gunshots, what should I look at? So she kind of mentally prepared herself. She's like, I'm going to look at Kennedy's head and I'm going to stay focused there. So she had pre-prepared for this.
Mm.
And during the shooting, she was pretty sure that somebody in a white busboy uniform had literally gone right up and like put his hand to Kennedy's head. She saw that. And she couldn't reconcile that with Sirhan. And she's like, when I saw Sirhan, I'm not sure which shooter she was talking about because she definitely saw Sirhan and she also saw a white guy in a busboy uniform. And she's like, he didn't have a gun in his hand. I don't know why I didn't see the gun in his hand. Well, there are guns, and you can see this at the CI Museum in DC, that fit within your hand, and the trigger is like a ring. You can literally like shoot somebody from the palm of your hand, and no one would know that you had a gun or a 22. The Navy.
Oh, sorry. Is this the busboy that claims to have given him the rosary as he was
No,
bleeding?
no,
Okay.
it's definitely not that
Okay, okay.
busboy.
Because he definitely was
Yeah, no,
holding his head. All right.
he's a sweetheart. No. And I asked him, I'm like, were there any busboys that were new that night? I'm like, think really hard because he has been like denying the story that he originally told the FBI, and I finally sent him his FBI statement because he had told the FBI that night that two busboy uniforms had been stolen the week before
Right.
and and some LAPD officers had been in, and in that same time period, and it may have been the LAPD that stole the busboy uniforms. So he said, I've tried to deny that story for years. I said, well, that's funny because I'm looking at your FBI statement right now. Did they make it up? And I sent it to him, and he's like, oh, I forgot that. I must have said that. He goes, but I didn't know that personally. Somebody else must have told me that, and that's what I was relaying. So, but I asked him, think hard, was there a busboy who hadn't been there that night? He goes, yeah, there was a new guy. And his name was Henry. He couldn't remember the last name, and there's literally no Henry listed anywhere in the pantry or interviewed. So I thought that was interesting. And of course, even if he said Henry, that might not have been his real name anyway. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't go by that. But unfortunately, he died shortly after there, wasn't able to follow up, on anything else about that. But uh, I also met a guy on the set of the film Bobby, which was done by Emilio Estevez, and I had met his researcher, and I offered them maps of the hotel. And in there, he had Sirhan dressed in a white busboy uniform. I'm like, well, that's not true. That's not what Sirhan was wearing. He goes, no, we have a guy who was in the
Huh.
pantry who said that is what Sirhan was wearing. I'm like, there are pictures of Sirhan in the pantry.
Right.
We know he wasn't wearing that. But he pointed me to this guy, and I didn't have his name. I couldn't remember his name when I wrote it because I lost the paper with the contact info on it before I left the set. But when I wrote him up in my book, kind of under no name, somebody recognized the story and sent it to me. And so in the addendum to the paperback version, I name him. I point you to a recording of him that he made from the pantry that night. He was really there. And he was so 100% certain that it was a busboy who shot Kennedy from behind. So now I
Mm.
have two witnesses, him and Freddie, that correspond. And that's why I really don't believe Thane Caesar killed Bobby Kennedy. I think he tried to. I think he did his part, but I really think it was the busboy person who did it.
It's also very possible that he reactively pulled his gun out and panic shot and maybe grazed or something like that. Or
No,
maybe
no.
was there
And the
any
reason,
discharge from his gun?
yeah,
Did
the
they?
reason I screw my face up and I'm like, no, it's like, first of all, he's a trained bodyguard. They don't do
Mm,
that, you know?
okay.
It's not like he's some Joe off the street. Not only that, he was a CIA asset.
Yeah.
So again, CIA doesn't hire people that they don't rigorously train or, make sure they don't accidentally, because if he's going to accidentally pull his gun and fire, what if it's the wrong person? And by the way, so now I want to go back to Sirhan. So if we've got at least three other people with guns, the guy on the table, the guy for the headshot, and the guy under the arm, did Sirhan fire any bullets at all? And in fact, when the LAPD went to compare the bullets, they couldn't match them to Sirhan's gun. And they knew this almost immediately. Literally, the day that Wolfer, the criminalist at the LAPD, the day he gets the bullet from Kennedy, from the coroner, and puts it under a microscope. He goes out later that night for 5 hours, unaccounted for, comes back and makes a photomicrograph, a microscopic comparison photo of two bullets, neither of which are linked to the case, and keeps that photo hidden for years. And it doesn't surface until a 1975 panel is reviewing the case. And Wolfer says this shows a match between the Kennedy bullet and one of the test bullets. And the panel said, no, that's actually not the Kennedy bullet, nor is that a test bullet from Sirhan's gun. That's a victim bullet matching another victim bullet. So they couldn't match any of the bullets to Sirhan's guns. They just dummied up some new ones, buried it in the record, and thought if this ever gets reinvestigated, at least we have two bullets that match each other. And in fact, they had three bullets that matched each other because by the time Wolfer was doing that, another bullet had been recovered from Wiesel, and that one isn't entered into evidence right away. That one has like a 24-hour journey to the LAPD. And I talk to cops all the time, and I don't tell them the context of my question. It's like, hey, if somebody got a bullet from a crime scene, is there ever a chance there'd be like a 24-hour delay, or they would check in other evidence, but not that, and then turn it in a day later? He's like, oh, absolutely not. Oh my God, they'd get, written up and fired. And no, 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 they have to take that right to the crime lab right away, or right to the place where they logged the evidence in. And so that bullet, I think, also was altered. That was the only one that seemed to retain its original markings because, how do I say, it didn't retain its original markings. It came from a guy whose initials were LMO. All right, and that one was
Mm,
the late entry. And then the other two, one was from Goldstein, which was originally marked with an X, but when the panel examined it, it had no marking at all because it wasn't the Goldstein bullet, right? And and then the Kennedy neck bullet, when the coroner took it out, he marked it TN for Thomas Noguchi and 31, the last two digits of the autopsy case number. And he confirmed at the grand jury he was looking at his bullet and he read it off and explained why it was marked that way. Well, we're talking a 22, which is like the size of a pencil eraser. So if he put TN31 on there, there's not a lot of room for anything else, right? But the bullet the panel examined in 75 was marked DWTN on the base. So clearly not the same bullet. And when I brought this up to Cyril, not Cyril Wecht, but oh, I can't even think of the name, but there were some guys who had looked into the ballistics evidence, and they're like, "Oh, Lisa, you're wrong. That was the marking Dwayne Wolfer put on the side of the bullet." And I'm like, "No, it says right here he marked it on the that was the marking on the base of the bullet. I'm not making this up, And then he's like, "Oh, like that's different. We didn't know
mm,
that." And people assume stuff because they so are certain that Sirhan was guilty because so many saw him fire. But
mhm.
it's clear to me from my research that the guy was firing blanks. And so not only and people could say, well, he was still part of the conspiracy. It's like, no, not if he's firing a gun, not even realizing it has blanks in it, not knowing he's in the pantry because now he thinks he's back at the shooting range. There's
Yeah.
literally no evidence for his guilt now. And I've been just waiting for some lawyer or attorney to figure this out. and sue the LAPD on his behalf because he was wrongly framed. He was the perfect patsy. He literally couldn't remember being set up. And since he didn't remember what happened, and everybody said, well, we saw you fire a gun, he believed he must have done it.
Yeah.
And since he couldn't remember, and he even said this while being questioned, he's like, well, I might as well die and say I did it for my country than just go down as being crazy and having no motive at all. So
Mm.
Sirhan, adopted the motive that he had done it because he was upset over the Palestinian people's treatment by Israel and the rest of the world. And for that, people have seized on that. They also say he confessed in court. Well, he basically threw a tantrum in court because they were exposing a lot of his school records and they were about to drag in his mother and and people he didn't want on the stand. And he's like, and they were talking about his upbringing, his traumatic, very traumatic upbringing, because he was in Palestine during the Nakba when Israeli
Oh.
forces came in and seized. He saw people killed in front of him. He saw women with their breasts cut and bleeding in front of them. He went to pull water, and he's like a 4-year-old. He's pulling
Yeah.
water up, and there's a severed hand in it, in the drinking water. It's like the most horrific upbringing you can imagine. And so anyway, they're going through his background, and I'm sure somebody must have mentioned that Robert Kennedy had been there at that time because he had. He was a reporter in 1960. I'm sorry, 1940, whatever it was, 48, I think, reporting
48.
on the conflict. And so Sirhan's like, yeah, I killed Robert Kennedy with, 20 years malice aforethought, because it was 20 years ago and he was
Mm.
4 years old at the time. People took that as a legitimate confession, and the press reported, Sirhan confessed to the crime. He was like making fun of them, like, are you serious? I killed him because as a 4-year-old, I had this plot to come to America and kill
Mm.
Robert Kennedy for 20 years. I mean, he was literally making fun of them, and the press is, they look it up in a database and see what was said and repeat the
Yeah.
phrase, no context whatsoever.
The written word definitely takes away the sarcasm or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call that.
Yes. Yes.
To, oh, I just wanted to circle back on the hypnosis thing. In your story about like seeing it firsthand, a lot of people don't like to admit that they don't have agency or that they could give away their own agency so freely. But I mean,
Mhm.
even if you put all of that aside, we know of drugs and the CIA's investigation into drugs for the purposes of mind control.
Scopolamine.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's exactly what I was going to say. So even if
Yeah.
you have doubts about hypnosis, it is known that people have horrifying stories. It's terrifying that you can lose your own free will.
Yes, yes. And the CIA was experimenting with drugs as well as hypnosis, and it is possible that Sirhan was given a combo of both. Um, The one thing that's not possible is that he was drunk. And again, that's what his
Mm,
defense team did. That's what Dan Moldea says. He was drunk off his ass. He'd had 4 Tom Collins. First of all, there's no one to say he had 4 Tom Collins, and not one witness. We've all been around drunk people. I don't know anybody over the age of 20 who's not been around a drunk person, right?
yeah.
They smell, their eyes are bloodshot, they're not making sense, they weave a little bit when they walk. I mean, it's really easy to see somebody who's had 4 drinks in an hour. So you can
Yeah.
tell, right? And not one witness mentioned that at all. And when the police put him in the car, they didn't mention that at all, but they did notice that his eyes, his pupils were dilated. And that is one of the signs of hypnosis that you can't fake. Because you can, people do it all the time. I had a friend who worked at a theme park. He's like, oh, yeah, I used to always go up in the hypnosis show and just fake like I was hypnotized to entertain the audience. He's like, I assumed that's what everybody was doing. I'm like, no, that's not what everybody was doing. And you shouldn't
Mm.
have done that, you asshole.
Yeah.
But, like I said, but his eyes wouldn't have been dilated because he was faking it.
Interesting.
But a real hypnotic person, their eyes would be a little dilated because that's just a common side effect. And I'm sure it just has to do with relaxing the mind.
Hmm. Oh, I was just gonna ask about this the girl in the polka dot dress. The first time I heard about that, it was on film the night of young woman out on the balcony said that the woman in the polka dot dress ran across her saying, we shot him, we shot him. and
Hmm.
she asked who and described
We shot Kennedy.
yeah,
Yeah.
we shot Kennedy, described a Caucasian female, dark hair, and then Mexican American or Hispanic American, I forget how she described him. But those two are those two who you think actually committed the
No, I don't think they were
okay.
shooters. I think they were part of the conspiracy, and I think that's why she said we shot him. I
Mm,
do believe there was a team there. I think the team colors were polka dots because she was not the only one in polka dots. In fact, for years I tried to find where this coffee urn was because Sirhan remembered pouring coffee out of an urn for a girl in a polka dot dress, and there was no coffee urn in the pantry where you'd think it would be. So I'm like, where was this? Well, it turned out right backstage of where Kennedy was speaking, there's like a little anteroom area, and that's where the coffee urn was. So they were literally like that close to him. They were like backstage. And a guy in a with a big moon face, a tall guy with a moon-shaped face and a polka dot tie pointed them to the pantry. So he must have known they were going there. What's funny is the Kennedy campaign had set up a diversionary line to make it look like Kennedy was going to go downstairs first and shake hands with the public. But Kennedy always went to the print media before he did anything because he'd been a print media journalist and he had sympathy for them because the TV guys always got their time and the print media rarely got their time. So he always made a point of talking to them. So it was a guarantee he would go there. And the only two ways were either through the full crowd in the ballroom or through the pantry. Well, obviously, of the two, which are you going to choose? So the guy in the polka dot tie seemed to know this, pointed them to the pantry. At the door of that pantry was a girl in a polka dot scarf. All right, she's the girl who died a year later mysteriously after coming forward to claim this is Kathy Fulmer, who claimed she
mm,
was the girl in the polka dot dress. But of course, she wasn't in a polka dot dress, but she was wearing a polka dot scarf. Um, so I think they were part of the team, and I think the girl's place was to get Sirhan in position so that he would be a credible patsy for the assassination. The guy in the gold shirt, maybe he was a gunman. That I don't
yeah.
know. You know, he could have been. Um, but anyway, so Sandy Serrano's sitting on the back fire escape, and I've been on that back fire escape, you know, and I've seen the layout of the room and so on, and it's on the 8th Street side, and if somebody goes down that way, there's like it's very dark, and there was a hill that you'd kind of disappear into and then get your car, no one would ever see you again. And that's basically what happened to her. As soon as these people ran by her, she lost track of them
Yeah.
almost immediately. And she didn't believe them at first. So she went downstairs and asked a guard there, you know, was Kennedy shot? And he's like, no, are you drinking? What are you talking about? And so she didn't think anything about it at first. And then she, you know, started to hear stuff and then went in to call her mother and her, you know, anyway, I talk about that in my book. But she was not the only person to hear that conversation. And it took me years to track down Katie Kerr, who was 13 years old at the time, who was not far from Sandy Serrano when that whole conversation went down. Because the police basically leaned on Sandy until they broke her. They
Yeah.
took her out for an SUS special unit senator steak dinner. She was underage, you know, and they had her drink wine and then they put her in a lie detector test, kind of against her will. She had brought her aunt with her as protection, but her aunt's like, "Oh, sure, you can take her in the room without me." And Sandy's like, "No, that's the whole reason you're with me is not to leave me alone with the police." And once they got her alone in the room, they ran, you know, what I would call a session on her and asked her a bunch of questions that she didn't break. So then the guy went back and started running like the almost the same questions in the same order, like a script. And that's when Sandy's like, oh my God, I'm never going to get out of here until I
Mm,
say what they want me to say. And she kind of says that, like, I know you just want me to say this. He's like, no. And she's like, all right, just tell me what you want me to say and I'll say it. He's like, no, it has to be in your words. It's like,
yeah.
you have to create your own lie, basically.
A
And
common
yeah.
forced confession technique.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's horrific. And I spent more time on it than any other book has because they did this to other people. And I was able to then shorthand it and say they gave them the Sandy Serrano treatment and people knew what I meant. But anyway, this other woman, Kathy Kerr, had also seen the conversation, and because she was so young, it was much easier to break her. And they went to her parents' house. It's like, well, she saw this, it goes against everything we've seen, and it's a crime to lie to the police. And
Mhm.
they made her retract. But in later years, I caught up with her, and she's like, Lisa, whatever I said first, she's like, I don't know, it's been so many years now, but whatever I said first is what I heard, because and she said she heard them say they shot Kennedy.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, she literally like got me through a Facebook message about a week before my book was to go to print. So I was able to add in this whole little extra witness at the last minute. I had emailed her 3 years earlier and pinged a couple of times since and never heard back. And she just only had just seen the message then. So persistence pays off and patience sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
You mentioned the doubt that even Sirhan had shot the gun.
Oh, Sirhan definitely fired a gun, but I
Okay.
believe he was
Oh, it
firing
was
blanks
blanks.
because not only could they not match any of Kennedy's bullets to him, but again, not any of the victim bullets could be matched to Sirhan's gun. And so what happened is this panel that reinvestigated only the ballistics evidence, they were given a very small, tight area to reinvestigate, because Ted Chirac had put out a film called The Second Gun. And of course, I would have named it the third gun or the fourth gun, knowing what I know now. But because of that, they were trying to show that only one gun had been used.
I see.
And that's what they end up doing. They matched two victim bullets to each other and said, therefore, we can only prove one gun was used and only one shooter was seen, which was again not true, but to the media that seemed credible. Therefore, Sirhan is guilty and it was only one gun. And buried in each of those articles is the admission that they couldn't match any of the bullets to Sirhan's gun. Now, the gun barrel was heavily leaded, yet the bullets fired were copper-jacketed bullets. And copper-jacketed bullets pull the lead out when they go through. It's a way of cleaning the gun, is the copper
wow.
literally sucks it out of there. And so if Sirhan had been firing the copper bullets, shouldn't have been leaded at all. And so this panel of ballistics experts, one of them suggested, well, maybe the lead grew in the barrel. I'm sorry, lead is not a crystal and it doesn't grow. It's a mineral, it doesn't
Their
do that.
explanation is alchemy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And of course, the simplest explanation is he was firing bullets that weren't copper jacketed all day at the range. So, of course, his barrel was heavily leaded. And when he fired the blanks, they weren't copper jacketed either. They were just blanks. And so, they call them slugless cartridges, basically. It was just
Okay.
firing cartridges. And so that didn't remove
Gunpowder,
the lead at
no.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And so it's like
Yeah.
the simplest explanation is the best explanation. You can't match the bullets, and and Lynn Mang is like one of the smartest people I ever met, and because she was the one who first looked into this ballistic evidence, and it sounded so incredible, I didn't believe her. I actually said to her, "The police wouldn't do that." How naive was I? But I was curious enough that I dug into the records and found everything she'd found. It's like, oh my God, she was right. She was totally right. Oh, they also tried to say, oh, the LAPD took it out of the evidence locker and fired it to make souvenir bullets. That's not true. That's not possible. Again, I've confirmed this with numerous cops. They're not allowed that. And that particular
Souvenir
gun
bullets.
went right to the grand jury. And you have to know, because Wolfer is willing to dummy up bullets. If he could have dummied them up with the original gun, he would have.
Yeah.
They couldn't get the original gun, so that's why they had to dummy up all the other bullets that they were going to investigate so that they would all match each other. He
Is a
didn't have
souvenir
the
bullet
original.
as uh, what is that? Is that literally just so that they could have a bullet from the gun that shot Bobby Kennedy? Is that what that is?
That doesn't sound ethical.
Yeah, well, and it wouldn't surprise me if they did that on occasion, but you wouldn't mess with evidence in a case where it was like a presidential candidate. That evidence is more scrutinized. And
Mhm.
like I said, it literally the gun went overnight to the grand jury because the gun went to the grand jury before they got the bullet from Kennedy,
Mm.
to match. Because Kennedy didn't die until like 26 hours later. And obviously they couldn't pull out all the bullets until he was really dead. They
Mm.
pulled out in his head the bullet had shattered, so they didn't have that one, but there was one in the back of his neck. But there was no point in removing it before he died because it wasn't fatal. And once he did die, they took it out and gave it to the LAPD. And by then, Wolford didn't have Sirhan's gun anymore. So that's why all the machinations, and even in the trial, first of all, there are three guns involved with this case. There's two that are very similar. One is like H35857 or so. I know I've got the right digits, but I also know they're in the wrong order. And then one was like H58725 or so. They're super close. There's only like one digit difference between them. And in the trial transcript, Wolfer said we found a gun with a very close serial number. Those two sounded so much alike I can't even keep them straight. All right, but then there was
These are three guns that were on the scene.
no, that the LAPD used when they were doing bullet examinations and tests.
Okay.
And in the film, The Second Gun, he shows you H18605 or whatever that other one is. And it doesn't sound anything like the others. The others, like I said, are off by one digit. And then you have this one where every digit is different. It's not even remotely the same gun at all, in terms of serial numbers. But in the trial transcript, Wolfer puts the wrong one into evidence, and the lawyers do not check it, and yet they check the spelling of every name, they check evidence numbers, they have like a minute attention to detail. Every morning before the trial, as part of the transcript in chambers with the judge, they go through the previous day's transcript and enter all the corrections. So if they had put the wrong gun into evidence, they would have checked it. But instead, I mean, if it was a mistake, if it was a typo, they would have corrected it. But instead, I believe that Wolfer literally brought a different gun to the trial. I believe Sirhan was convicted with the wrong gun, a gun he never owned, and I believe that's why when his gun box at home was found, the label was torn off it, so that no one could compare the original numbers. And I think Wolfer just screwed up along the way and didn't correct it in all the records. Because when the police take it into evidence, there are tape recordings. He couldn't quickly go back and fudge all those. And when you listen to the tape, they give the number of the gun that Sirhan probably really owned. All right, as the one that was. But that's not the one they used at the trial. So when Wolfer, swears this gun and no other killed Robert Kennedy, he might have been telling the truth, but that wasn't Sirhan's gun. And that
Gosh.
might be why he brought the false gun to the trial, so that he wouldn't be lying and his voice would have that ring of authority and confidence, because he knew for a fact that was the gun that fired the bullets they turned into evidence.
Yeah, the LAPD, I mean, not only they definitely have they've showed the willingness to fudge things or a like incompetence to mishandle the real data and evidence. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
it could be a
years later,
combination of the
Wolfer
two.
was a
Could be
joke. They would say, "Oh, that guy did a Wolferism," or something, pulled a
really.
Wolfer on that, meaning he fudged the evidence. Anyway,
Do you have any opinion on the more contemporary theory that it was a Secret Service member who accidentally discharged his gun?
no, that's not a new theory. That's
Oh,
actually a
okay.
very old theory, and it's been disproven a lot of times. Yeah, there's some old picture of a guy holding a gun, and yeah, so similar to what you said earlier about things, either an accidental shooting and that stuff doesn't happen. Again, Secret Service are trained professionals. They don't accidentally shoot anybody, and the bullet wouldn't have been from the right angle. It couldn't have, the diameter of the bullet would have been different. Everything about it would not have worked. So no, but I think that's another of the CIA counter
Counter.
theories.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And again, if JFK was killed by a conspiracy or JFK wasn't killed by a conspiracy, it's like if he wasn't killed by the Secret Service, then it wasn't a conspiracy. It's like, no, there's still many other options that he was killed by a conspiracy, just not that one. And that's how the CIA has kind of kept it. So they'll prop up a theory and then they'll eventually shut it down. And the people who fell for that theory go, oh, I guess there was no conspiracy. And, I talked to Gordon Novell, who had bugged Jim Garrison's office during his investigation of Clay Shaw. And he calls those vacuum operations, where the CIA will, put out a lie and see who it attracts and then kind of suck them all up at once by getting them all to fall for this lie. And then it's an easy way to discredit them. It's like bowling. You get them all to fall for it and then you knock all the pins down at once. So it's really important to just I assume everything I'm told is not true unless I can prove otherwise. And I think that is a much better approach to the assassinations of the 60s than, as others have suggested, believing it's true until it's disproven. I think that's a really waste of time. You go
Yeah.
way down a rabbit hole only to find it doesn't lead anywhere.
It makes a lot of sense for, oh, I don't know if you would call this a cold case, but a case where the evidence is set in stone and we're not going to
Yeah.
gain anything more. You might as well just scrape and make sense of what's actually there.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, it's not like we don't have a lot to go on. There was a new book out called Chokeholds, where every chapter is like 100% proof that it was a conspiracy. They don't try to prove who did it. They just show this one piece of evidence 100% proves conspiracy. There's a woman who wrote a wonderful book on JFK. See if I can think of the title. Monica Weizak is the author. Oh, The Last American President, What the World Lost When We Lost JFK. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. She went back through all his papers and records and spent a lot of time in doing really good research and showed what a progressive JFK really was, that he was never the Cold Warrior he's been
Hmm.
painted at. And in retrospect, I used to always recommend Jim Douglas's book JFK and the Unspeakable. I really like the,
Hmm.
religious angle too. But he missed the story about who Kennedy was. He tried to make it sound like Kennedy changed into a good guy, but Kennedy was always the good guy. It's just he hid that so that he could get elected, at
Mm.
various places. But he spoke out against imperialism in the 50s. He gave a great speech about Algeria before Congress, that we shouldn't be, aiding imperialists, trying to take over foreign nations. He tried to get Israel to register as a foreign lobbyist. He
Yeah.
didn't want them having a nuclear power plant. And they even changed leaders to delay having to respond to him on that. Ben-Gurion
Hmm.
actually stepped down so he wouldn't have to, admit they were building a nuclear power plant. It's crazy. So,
Zooming out a bit, I think what's so interesting about the RFK case is you lay it out in the book, especially. It's like it just seems pretty dead to rights to me that it's a conspiracy. There doesn't seem like there's any wiggle room. Whereas people talking about JFK or other murders, they can always point towards, oh, this is conjectural or something like that. Whereas with this case, for a number of reasons, first of all, just like the ballistics of it. There's too many gunshots. There's too many holes.
yeah.
And clearly, when you look into everyone's behavior, from the police the to the prosecutors to the judge, it's just like there's just far too much for any reasonable person to look at this case and say there isn't something up, right? And I think that that's a really yeah, and you speak to this as well in the book, and other people have brought this up before. Because what's the thing people always say to refute conspiracies? There's no way that many people could keep
Could keep
that big
something
a
secret.
secret, right? And I think something I like about this is it puts the lie to that assumption that, oh, there's always going to be a, I don't know, an Edward Snowden or something,
Yeah.
who's going to. And I wonder if you could just talk about that a little more broadly, not
Yes.
not necessarily just in this case, but about that assumption that people have, because it drives me insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I want to start by going to the media for a second because most people don't know how deeply the CI is embedded in the media at every level. Um,
Hmm.
and they've been doing that since inception because journalists make great spies. They can go anywhere and everywhere, ask questions that seem legitimate because they're coming from a journalist. They can get very personal, they can ask anything, go anywhere. They've got those little passes that get them in and out of events. So it makes sense that the CI would want their information. All right. But more than that, too, if a journalist is going against the CI and maybe exposing an operation, then the CI wants that guy either fired or removed or demoted or something. And we have a classic case in point of that with Gary Webb. When Gary Webb went to expose the CIA cocaine Contra, triangle that was happening as part of the Iran-Contra, thing in the 80s, Gary Webb exposed this in the 90s, and it was funny. I actually met Gary Webb because of this. I had had a document on my desk for a year because I didn't know when I was going to use it, but I knew I would have a use for it. And it was an article headlined by Walter Pincus, major reporter in the Washington Post, saying how I traveled abroad on CIA subsidy. And he was recounting how in his youth he'd been sponsored by the CIA to go to this like international democratic gathering and basically spied on up and coming people, politicians of the future from other countries because they all gathered at this meeting. And the first journalist to go after Gary Webb, first there was media silence. First, everybody ignored his story and hoped it wouldn't go away. But this is the internet, and the story wasn't going away. And I was one of those amplifying it. And so the first voice that went after him was Walter Pincus. And so I found Gary Webb's email address and I forwarded that to him. And I said, you're going to want this. And I said, and besides that, you need to go read Carl Bernstein's article, The CIA and the Media. And I'm pretty sure I either sent him a link or I might have physically mailed it to him. And then later I met Gary Webb and he's like, oh, you're the one who sent me that. And he's like, I have a funny story about that. He goes, because when I opened that and I read that, I thought I was being set up. That was like too good to be true. And so I didn't believe it. So I called our archives at the San Jose Mercury News and they said, yeah, we actually ran that article because they had a relationship with the Washington Post on that exact date. Yeah, that's a real article. And he still thought he was being set up now from the inside. So he went to like a little tiny town, where there was like no CIA presence and went to their library and looked it up on microfilm. And it wasn't till he saw it for himself, out of context of
Yeah.
everything else that he believed it. So then he started looking into the CIA and the media, and he actually wrote a chapter for a wonderful book called Into the Buzzsaw by Christina Borgeson, who is a CBS producer who saw the CIA shut down the TWA Flight 800 story when she was working to expose that the plane had been brought down by friendly fire. And the CIA literally made its own fake video to try and show people that, well, you think you see a missile streaking up into the sky because 100 witnesses reported that. Literally, 100 witnesses went to the police and said, I saw this light streaking up into the sky, and then the plane exploded in the sky. And so the CIA tried to say, well, what they saw was something coming down from the explosion, but it looked like it was going up because of the distortion of perception. And it was the craziest thing. And that actually ran on CBS. And I remember watching this going, oh my God, we must have shot our own plane out of the sky if the CIA is telling me the opposite.
It becomes that's like the way of validating the truth is how much are they denying it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, if the CIA is controlling the media, and the first book I read on this case was by Mark Lane. I'm sorry, on the JFK case was Mark Lane, Plausible Denial, and he opens with a journalist named Priscilla Johnson McMillan and talks about her being a CIA asset and being the first to interview Oswald when he gets to the Soviet Union for his so-called defection and supposed suicide attempt and all that. And then she ends up writing some of the first day stories after the assassination comes down. And I'm like, well, that's how these cases get covered up. If the CIA has journalists embedded who get first crack at these stories, we'll never
and
get the
literally,
truth.
yeah. Well, and with JFK, literally the Zapruder film. I mean that blew my head off. Sorry, no
Yeah,
pun
Life
intended. When I
magazine.
found out about Henry
Yeah.
Luce bought it and then just kept it under lock and key for decades.
Yes. Yes. And it was Henry Luce's organization, but C.D. Jackson, the man who personally bought it, was literally a CIA asset who had been working
Yeah.
with them for years. Henry Luce was a close friend of Alan Dulles. Right. And then they kept that film from the public. It's funny, I'm on Dan Rather's Substack, and he was writing about how the media has no credibility and people can't tell fake news from real news. And I just felt compelled to write back and said, well, you pretty much started that when you saw the Zapruder film and you told us Kennedy's head went violently forward. And we now know that his head went back and to the left, didn't go forward at all. So it's like until you own your own role in this, the media is going to continue to have a problem. And I'm pretty sure he never read it and wouldn't respond if he did.
Yeah.
But it's the irony of these CIA assets telling us, "Oh, you should really believe the media and stop falling for these conspiracy stories." Now, here's my other point about that, though, is a lot of people go way too far. People believe a lot of conspiracy theories that aren't true at all. And I do the research, and most people don't. Most people check their gut and then go with it. And that's a terrible way to do this because even in, let's just take the JFK assassination. All right, there's like 99 different theories out there. Let's say there's 100. 99 are wrong, one is correct. So when you hear any conspiracy theory, bear in mind that the people behind the conspiracy often put out the first counter conspiracy theory to distract you. So, for example, when JFK was killed, David Atlee Phillips, one of the CIA's propaganda masters, had his assets push the Castro did it angle, which was funny because James Angleton, in counterintelligence, had his media assets put out the stories that made it look like the Soviet Union had done it. So it's like they were following their own agenda. It's not like they're all working from a master playbook. These things don't really work that way. They know their little piece of it, and then they try and spin it the way that benefits their organization, their personal status, etc. Um, so anyway, so even when things are conspiracies, most of the theories about it are probably false. And if you approach it that way, I think we will all be much more responsible. I call myself a conspiracy realist because I can't stand conspiracy theories. It's like, don't show me your theory. I could care less. Show me your physical evidence. Show me, your witness testimony. Show me something credible. I can't tell you how many people since my book came out, and even before it, when I was working on it, I've had so many people over years call me, I know who the girl in polka dot dress is. And I used to really give them good long hearings. But after two or three of these, listening for an hour or 2 hours and realizing at the end they literally have no evidence whatsoever. It's just somebody they met that they believe that I
Mm,
don't believe because it doesn't even match what I know already. And but other people listen to these people and think they're true. I remember, a friend, a doctor, a trained medical professional. He's like, oh, well, one of the guys in the mob told the guy I know who told me that, this mob guy killed Kennedy. And I'm like, and you believe that? Why? You know? She's like, well, I believe my friend. And I'm like, and your friend believed his friend. And that friend fell for some crap that some mobster told him. That's how it works. And even within the CIA, that's how it works. Meaning, somewhere on the shelves behind me, there's a book, The Secret History of Guatemala, written by the CIA historian. And he talked about how difficult it is to write CIA histories because the CIA lies to itself
mm,
internally all the time. And so everybody had the lie about their particular operation and what it was supposed to do, and trying to sift out what really happened from all those lies. He's like, was a daunting task. And he's like, I'm not sure I got it right, but I did the best I could, and here's what I think happened. And so I thought that was probably a good book because the guy was very open and honest about that right up front.
Yeah.
that's an interesting job to have at a agency whose entire purpose is disinformation and noise and covering up
Yes.
secrecy, essentially,
Yeah.
is to document it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, I don't know if you saw the news this morning, but the Pentagon, Trump has ordered all the mainstream media. I didn't realize this, that they literally had offices inside the Pentagon building, like Time and
Yeah.
Newsweek and New York
I did not
Times and
know that.
ABC. Yeah, and so one, that shouldn't be happening because you shouldn't be embedded
Yeah.
with the people you're supposed to be reporting on. But
Yeah, I
now
don't
they're
like that
moving
at
in
all.
OAN and Fox News and all these right-wing propaganda outlets are being moved into the
Mhm.
Pentagon, and they're all going to get now indoctrinated with the same CIA lies because it's inevitable. You go to the water cooler and somebody just strikes up a conversation and you develop a rapport, and then they sneak you something and you assume
Hmm.
it's true because the guy works there and he snuck you something and said it in a secret way, and it must be true. I'm learning inside knowledge, and they're just setting you up. And how
Yeah.
can people be so naive, especially supposedly trained journalists? And I fear much more now because Fox News people are not trained journalists.
Yeah.
pure propagandists. I mean, it's shocking what passes for news here in America. It's shocking. And I wish people would, they need media literacy for propaganda, resistance, and they really need mind control literacy. I strongly believe that young kid who fired at Trump, may well have been a mind control victim. He
Oh
didn't
wow.
bring his ID with him, which is usually a sign of trying to protect some other co-conspirator. He had no apparent motive. No one could come up with a motive for him, even
Yeah.
after going through his whole phone and his websites and everything. It sounded like a classic case. And then the other weird guy who was hiding out at the golf course, who had ties to like the Ukrainian resistance and stuff. That
Yeah.
sounded like a CIA guy too to me.
His was very loopy. Like, how did he get so involved with like the Ukraine? How's he flying between countries? Like, I'm sure you
Yeah,
can
whenever,
fly there, but it's just it seemed a
yeah.
very Oswald-esque too, that his interest in that region.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like,
Yeah.
who's strung out enough that no one would believe we hired them? And in fact, in my book, I quote, there was a guy sent to kill the leader of the Philippines, Marcos. And, his wife is like, why would the CIA hire you of all people? You're
Hmm.
so erratic, and he's like, that's the point. I'm totally deniable.
Yeah.
It's like no one would believe I work for the CIA, and that's why I'm the perfect asset for them. And that's true. People think of like a CIA agent as like a James Bond or something. No, no. They push it down and push it down, and this cutout hires this cutout who hires this guy who
Hmm.
hires this guy. And the guy who actually does the killing is not necessarily the most skilled assassin in the
Well,
world.
well, and it's helpful to have the fall guy actually be the most expendable one, right? Like someone who you haven't
Exactly.
necessarily invested that much time or money into, and who
Exactly.
knows very, very little, right?
Right. Right. Or
I'd
nothing
say
in Sirhan's case. Yeah.
an
So,
enriched past too that you can point to and be like, this person was radicalized is another good key feature of a patsy.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Hmm.
And again, yeah, Sirhan being a Palestinian, and it's funny because at that point, only the CIA was really concerned about the Palestinian conflict, with the Israelis. It wasn't part of the popular culture at that time. There hadn't been the plane hijackings and a lot of bombings at that point. So it was almost too soon to be blaming a Palestinian. I just think he happened to be a convenient asset for him. And in my book, I talk about where I think he was spotted because he was out in Corona riding race horses, and Corona, he had a fascination with Corona and was going out there like every week before the assassination. I'm like, what the hell is he going out to? What's out there? So I drove out there. It's not that far from LA. It's like a 40-minute drive, and there's a huge naval weapons base inland. I mean, we're talking the Inland Empire, as they call it. There's no water, but there is actually a huge lake there, which I didn't know because you really can't see it driving around. But if you look at satellite photos, there's actually a huge lake there. But it's their surface weapons division, which is not their subs, obviously. And then it occurred to me, what if mind control people are surface weapons? Uh, so anyway, he had gone to a hospital there, and the only hospital I could find at that time when he went, in the early 60s, and I could be wrong about this, but there was one at the naval base. And it was so weird, they kind of shut it down for some years. It's like bad things were happening there, and prisoners were being mistreated. And I think the CIA was doing some, mind control experiments there. And as I was working on my book, I found somebody online claiming he had been mind controlled at that particular base. I couldn't find anything to justify that or any reason to believe him, and I wondered if I was being set up, and I didn't include it in my book for that reason. But if he was, I feel bad for him if somebody
Yeah.
was trying a call for help. Yeah.
So
Well,
with the most recent going back to like the disclosure that's happening and like the
Hmm.
most recent I also want to ask you about most recent assassinations on President Trump's life. Uh when it comes to this new disclosure, it to me my immediate reaction was, as a skeptic of just the government saying things, especially on topics of conspiracies, is that this is just another way for them to maintain control of the narrative and
Yes.
release more of the counter conspiracies, as you put them, which is a great
Yes.
phrase because this is I feel what's happening. And I don't know if you want to talk about that and how you see the media landscape kind of eating it up.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, again, first of all, if they had the truth, they're not going to release it.
Yeah.
I don't believe the truth exists, but if it were there, there's no way they would release it no matter who the executive order came from. It's a great propaganda operation for Trump to say, see, I'm following through on my campaign promise. I've told you I'd
Right.
get the files, and here are the files. And then they'll release, maybe 1,000 new documents and say, okay, that's it, that's everything, we're done. Biden already said we're not releasing anymore. So I'm pretty sure the CIA has given us everything they want. In the last couple of releases, they touted like thousands of new documents, but many of them were one, still redacted, which is illegal according to the Assassination, Records Review Board's guidance and the act that created the review board to release the documents. They weren't supposed to have redactions. Yeah, except in really, really extreme cases of national security. And they're redacted all over the place. The
Yeah.
stuff we get. Also, we're getting a lot of duplicates where maybe one or two words have been unredacted in a document we already had. And the two words that are now unredacted don't tell us any more than the rest of the document did. In fact, Jim DiEugenio loves to tell a story. He talked to Judge Tunheim, who was on the Assassination Records Review Board, and said at one of our first meetings, we put up a document on the screen, and it's like, they asked the CI guy, is there any reason this document can't be redacted? And he's sitting there and he's looking at it, looking at it, and they've all read it. It's like there's nothing in that document. And they're like, we can release this one, right? He goes, give me a minute, I'll find a reason not to release it.
Yeah.
I
What's the
mean, that's
oversight on that looking like?
yeah. And then again, you have this media. So again, let's pretend we did get the truth and it came out and it's in a document. Do you think the media is going to be allowed to report it? Probably not. It's like the CIA would say we had to let this go, but if this, story shows up, it's false, don't report it. You'll just look like conspiracy theorists, and journalists fall for that. There used to be a yearly dinner that the CI would hold with CBS and the New York Times, and they literally sat agent, media, agent, media, agent, media. So you're literally surrounded by agents from both sides. And it was a way for them to develop sources on both sides. The journalists would benefit from a leak from the CIA and get a story ahead of their competitors. And of course, the agent would now have a journalist where they could say, "Oh, when you see this leader, will you ask him this?" And
That's
so on.
wild.
So people don't understand how embedded, really and the more famous the journalist, the more subservient the journalist. And
Yeah.
there's, I have, I mean, probably can't see it, but at my old place, I literally got rid of one shelf of books. I used to have three shelves, and one full shelf of this width was all media books that talked about the CIA's relationship with the media. Reader's Digest was deeply in bed with the media. I mean, you wouldn't even think of that. It's like, I think of that as the kind of thing you read at the doctor's office. But
Mhm.
even then, it's like if there's a chance to propagandize,
Oh
they
yeah.
do it. So, yeah. So with the file releases, and here's the other thing. People think like what? They're all just sitting in a drawer and all we have to do is open that drawer and scan them and publish them and they're done. They're
Mhm.
in many different places by design. CI doesn't want to make it easy for us to get that. That's why we needed like the HSCA. It took them 2 years and they only got a fraction of the CI's records. And the same with the review board. They only got a fraction of the records because it's very hard to even identify. Plus, you read a document and suddenly that leads to somebody else. And now you want that guy's records too. But sorry, we're done releasing the records. That wasn't previously identified as a JFK assassination record, so you can't have it.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think it's a fantasy to believe we're ever going to get the truth from the files. I also think we have way more than enough to prove easily it was a conspiracy in all three cases and that the media has not told us the truth. And frankly, until the media at least tries to catch up and tell some of the truth, we know it was a conspiracy. We know how hard it is to prove who did it. It's pretty easy to prove who didn't do it. It's really easy to prove Oswald's CIA connections. It's really easy to prove that he was actually not even on the second floor, that he was literally, or the sixth floor, that he was literally standing outside. There's a photo of him. People have tried to say it's Billy Lovelady. That
Mm.
story falls apart when you really dig into that. That was Oswald on the front steps as the president's car is going by. And if the media could at least tell us that much, yes, we may never know who the actual shooter was. That isn't the story. To me, the story is who got the media not to pursue this, each time it has come up. When the HSCA concluded a probable conspiracy, that was their conclusion. What did the Washington Post report? It was possible there were two lone nuts shooting at the same time. I'm not making this up. They actually wrote that and published it. That's how far they will bend over backwards not to admit a conspiracy. So, yeah, I think the media needs to be on our side. It needs to be looking at these cases from the public's point of view and stop being a spokesperson for the government. I don't know if that's possible. And if it's not possible, then I encourage people to do what I do. Stop looking at the mainstream
Yeah.
media, read Mint Press News, follow Twitter, or X, because you'll hear stories from around the world that you won't hear in the mainstream media. I mean, that's how I was able to follow the Palestinian conflict. It's not covered on the TV or in the mainstream media here, but it's all over social media if you look.
Yeah.
And once a month or so, I Google CI and see what little news stories have leaked out because sometimes they're really interesting, and often they're leaked on like a Friday night because no one reads on a Friday night, right?
Yeah.
And by
Hmm.
Saturday and Sunday, it's already old news and it's gone. When my book came out, it was actually written up by the one journalist of the Washington Post who seemed to care and willing to tell the truth about it, Tom Jackman. And because of that, Politico did a little story on it, and CNN actually called me and wanted me to be on the air. They wanted to put me up next to Robert Mayhew's son so he could refute the guy that I believe was organizing,
No shit.
Yeah, they did. And then what happened next? Trump did some big crazy thing for like 5 days in a row, and by then they're like,
Yeah.
it's old news. We can't cover this now.
How
So,
convenient is that to have a president that just consistently pushes the news cycle away from anything?
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
How do you, I'm glad that you brought this to a contemporary place because I feel like a lot of the population has been primed to believe in this deep state, but at the same time, they believe that the deep state only works in one direction and that they're
Yeah.
almost more willing to believe an official narrative if as long as it's coming from their side. That I think is
Yeah.
maybe one of the more dangerous things that we're venturing into in this new media landscape. So I have a
It
few more questions.
is. And none of this used to be possible because we used to have something called the Fairness Doctrine and an equal time provision. The Fairness Doctrine said you have to devote part of your airtime to actual news about important events and instead of like entertainment news and all that stuff. So that was done away with under Reagan. And then the equal time provision was done away with in a bipartisan manner because um, the left didn't want the right to have equal time on their shows, and the right didn't want the left to have equal time on their shows. And in my opinion, everybody needs equal time, and the media should be covering. And then none of those laws applied to cable news in any case, because it was originally to the FEC airwaves. And since the cable news didn't come through the airwaves, they said they couldn't control it. It was all private companies. And I think it was Obama. Somebody took off the provision against propagandizing the American public. That never used to be allowed, even though it happened all the time. But now it's even allowed openly. It's like they literally removed all our protections. So, in my mind, the only way to rescue our planet and every other country on the planet is to teach propaganda awareness and media awareness. Call out examples every time you see it. I've been following, for example, the Gaza-Palestine conflict. And, it'd be like, Israeli soldiers killed, 5 Israeli soldiers killed. There'd be like 100 Palestinian terrorists killed. It's like, wait a minute, those were soldiers too.
Yeah.
It's like some of
The
them,
framing aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Or just,
people,
yeah,
because it's so,
Palestinians mysteriously perished somehow, whereas
yeah.
Israelis are murdered.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
1,000
Yeah.
Palestinians died, whereas, yeah, 10
Yeah.
Israelis killed.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when people call it out, people start to recognize it. So I think it's imperative on all of those who are aware of that to literally call it out every time you see it.
So going back to these alleged Trump disclosures or the
Oh, yes,
executive
yes.
order, do
Yeah,
you,
so what do we
do
expect
you,
to find? Do we expect
yeah,
to see a confession note from Alan Dulles saying, here's the plan, and yeah, we shot him, and woohoo. I mean, literally, when the Church Committee started investigating the CIA's assassinations, they found the closest thing they found was Bill Harvey's notes that said, put nothing on paper. So
yeah,
first of all, we shouldn't expect, any kind of actual confession, any actual plot documents, payment receipts. You're not going to find any of that. Even names of shooters, you're not going to find that. All right, but anything that's released is valuable to the degree that it's another piece of the puzzle. And when you get enough pieces, a good picture emerges. It's very clear to me after all these years and all the files that have been released that the CIA was deeply involved in the assassination
hmm
of JFK and MLK and RFK. The MLK case, there's a book waiting to be written about the hypnotism of James Earl Ray to make him also a patsy, because that's also clear to me he did not fire the gun. Oswald didn't shoot JFK, James Earl Ray didn't shoot Martin Luther King, Sirhan Sirhan didn't shoot Kennedy, and all of those are provable. All right. It's just not, how do I say, the RFK case is the easiest to prove because they were physically in the wrong position. The others, it's much harder to prove because you can't
right.
show exactly where they were at the time. It's easier to make the government's case in those. That doesn't mean it's true. So, but anyway, so first of all, even if they release the files, I think a presidential executive order is only basically a very strong request. It is not a demand, it is not a
Yeah.
law. The CI still has the right to act in accordance with its charter, and it says that in the orders about presidential executive orders that they never override that of other government agencies. All right. So there's no way the CIA is going to release, for example, Bill Harvey's travel records, because a lot of people suspect Bill Harvey was running the plot in Dallas. And there's a witness who puts him in, Dallas at the time of JFK's assassination. Bill Harvey claims he was still in Rome. If we had his travel records, we would know for sure where he was. Now, the CI knows we're after that, so it wouldn't surprise me if they dummied some up and tried to make it look like he was in Rome. But it's harder to dummy stuff up now than it would have been at the time because, the papers are faded and, it's like everything's computerized. It's a lot, a digital fake could be too perfect, if you will. So
hmm
anyway, but that's how we would know. Like, if the CI released a document that showed Bill Harvey was really in Dallas, I would think maybe we got all the files. And there's a few other records like that. It's not just that one record, but there are some that we have been waiting for a long time that we know are there. There's still some Warren Commission documents, like Oswald's knowledge of the U-2 program that have never been released. There's
Right.
stuff
Yeah.
we know we don't know that we know is
hmm
out there. And in the Martin Luther King case, again, very few people have looked at the CIA's role. Bill Pepper wrote a book that, had a lot of good pieces, but he basically fell for, I felt like a mob did it line that I don't buy at all. And
Yeah.
I think he was going that direction in the RFK case, and then I stepped in and ruined everybody's plans. There was like a big documentary planned and secrecy agreements and stuff. It's like, no, see, I killed Robert Kennedy, and it's really obvious. So there's a lot of evidence to that, a lot of which is in my book. Um, uh, in the CI was never asked for the records on the RFK assassination. They were given a very cursory request and said, "Oh, we searched and we don't have anything." Well, I know that's BS because in the LAPD files, they talk about their conversations with the CIA. And sometimes they do that in coded terms. And there's a certain type of document that shows up that I know is from the CIA. But if you're reading the files, you wouldn't know is from the CIA because you don't know the whole history of the case. The CIA was following members of the Sirhan family around. They were terrified that they would somehow get a new investigation launched. And or terrified that they would get other governments involved. And
Mm.
they literally like followed them through airports. I mean, it's just crazy. So I know the CIA had, at least at one point, a huge file on the RFK assassination. I mean, LAPD asked them for a background check on Sirhan, and they wrote about his stuff. I've never found those documents in the LAPD's files. And of course, CIA denies they have them, but they had to have had them at some point. So even if best case, everybody in the CIA is fired, everybody was installed with loyalists who want to get the truth out. I don't think those records are there. I think if there was
Right.
anything incriminating, that was destroyed 60 years ago.
And they've openly done that in the past with MK Ultra documents. I
Mhm.
forget
Yes.
because when
Oh,
the
they
new
destroyed most of
when
them.
Dulles was
Yeah.
coming
Most
in,
of
the
it, yeah.
previous director destroyed those
Yeah,
documents.
Richard Helms. Yeah,
Yes.
and it's funny. Yeah, there's a whole Watergate story there because I really think the CIA didn't set out to bring Nixon down through Watergate. James McCord wrote a friend of his at CI, if Richard Helms is fired, every tree in the forest will fall. And then Nixon asked Helms to claim Watergate was a CIA operation, which it actually was, but not in the way people think it was. Um, so anyway, Nixon, bottom line, fired Helms, made him ambassador to Iran, and then McCord wrote the judge and said perjury has been committed. And then Bloomfield, I think I have his name wrong. Anyway, one of the guys inside, I know I have his name wrong. One of the guys inside the White House said, "Oh, by the way, we had a taping system." But all
Wow.
that happens after Helms is fired in retribution. But on his way out the door, Richard Helms, his top priority was destroying the MK Ultra files. MK Ultra was an umbrella program of a bunch of sub projects. And when I say a bunch, I'm talking like 900. So when people say MK Ultra, that's overly broad. Also, people use MK Ultra as code for all mind control programs. And as many as MK Ultra had, there was also MK Naomi, MK Delta, Bluebird, Artichoke. There are many mind control programs. And I don't know what they go by today, but I'm 100% certain they're still in effect because they were successful. They talk in their files about the operational successes in the field. They hint at it in very strong ways. They don't outright say, "Oh, we killed somebody using hypnosis," because then they'd all, go to jail. But they hint at that very, very strongly that that's what they've been able to do.
Do you feel like if this release of the records, whatever they release, if that comes back as kind of like a loss, right? Or if people are like, this isn't much, or they make a big stink of it's not anything at all, is that another win for this argument that the deep state's hiding something, that there's a deep state element? It's kind of a
Oh, there,
win-win,
there,
don't you think?
there is a deep state. It's called the CIA.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's
it's part
not
of the
only the
state.
CIA. It's not only the CIA, right?
Hmm.
It's all the unelected people in government who control so much of our lives that we don't have any ability to see into that. It's their rich friends who give them ideas or payoffs to, hey, help me, overthrow this leader and I'll make sure there's something in it for you, It's I think, Trump is the deep state. That's
Yeah.
that's the irony of this. It's like if there is a deep state, Trump has been part of it for years. Like instead of draining the swamp, he's like brought all the swamp creatures into his house in DC. It's just the antithesis of what people thought they were voting for. It's so, so sad. And it's been I'm going to say this, Republicans on every ballot that I've had for many decades, there's usually some proposition in California to underfund public education. It's always sponsored by the right wing. It's never sponsored by the Democrats. And the reason for that is that dumb people work for less
Yeah.
and they vote Republican. And Trump even said that. I mean, there's literally video of him saying, wow, if you want to be president, I'd run as a Republican. They're so dumb they'd fall for anything. He actually said that on video, and
Yeah.
it's true. And you can show that video and people just ignore it because
Mhm.
it's not the reality they want to believe. And that was something I wanted to go back to that you mentioned right at the start of the show. Um, why do people vote against their best interests? And there's two reasons for that. One is that most of the time our brain is on autopilot. And studies show this. And we've all had a little bit of an experience with that when you're driving somewhere and suddenly you realize you haven't really been paying attention for the last few blocks or whatever, or a couple of miles. You're like, did I fall asleep? You're suddenly aware again. Your brain tries very hard not to think to conserve energy. It's a survival mechanism. The other thing our brain does is we have our tribal instincts, and by tribe I mean people who share your beliefs. Our tribal instincts are so strong that they completely outweigh logic. And again, studies have shown this over and over. And I talk about that a little bit in my book with one of the experiments, the Ash experiment, where um, somebody was brought into a room and shown a bunch of lines of different lengths, and they're in a table, in a row with a bunch of other people. And they're asked to tell, going down the line, what's the longest line on the board. And at first, everybody answers correctly. And then after the third or fourth question, they all start answering incorrectly except the test subject. And he doesn't want to be the odd man out. It's like, maybe I'm wrong. Everybody else is saying this. I must be wrong. And a full third of the people would change their answer to match the group rather than, and when they were asked afterwards, they're like, well, I knew that wasn't right, but since everybody else said it, I felt I
Yeah.
should too. And that's how people like Trump win. It's how lies get perpetuated. If enough people are saying it and repeating it, it must be true. And even intelligent
And
people.
social media is a great engine for that.
Yes, yes. And it's not a function of intelligence. It's that tribal instinct overrides normal brain function. And so, that being the case, I honestly don't know that we're going to be able to move to any other planet. I think we'll all be killing ourselves and killing our planet unless we can figure out how to elevate our brain to get beyond this binary thinking of us versus them, Democrat and Republican, as if those are the only two choices. We have to break out of a binary mindset.
And you mentioned multiple avenues that we get led down when we try to solve these things. There's so much noise, there's so many distractions, there's so many
Yeah.
possibilities. Is there ever a possibility for closure?
I think people have to find closure for themselves. Like, to me, once I knew that the CIA likely did it, there's a ton of great evidence that they did, and there's a ton of great evidence that they control the media. I now have a worldview that not only makes sense, but has predictive value. And so I know when I hear certain stories, like, I don't know, if you walk by a newsstand, a lot of times they'll all have different cover stories and they're all focusing different things. But the day you walk by and they're all touting the same story, that's
Yeah.
when I feel like an operation is in place.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, if you think that way, I think you understand the world better. And so to me, the value of any scientific theory is its use in predicting other theories and other behaviors and stuff. And if you assume that the CIA killed Kennedy and that the media has been covering up for the CIA wittingly and unwittingly, meaning the CIA on the cover sheets for their assets, there's two boxes. One is witting and one is unwitting. Not everybody knows they're being used by the CIA. They just think this friend is giving them great inside information. They wouldn't dream that they're being manipulated by the CIA. So
Yeah.
we have to bear that in mind too, that very good, normal people can get sucked into this world and not even know it.
Yeah. I love that. The predictive value, it's a
Yeah.
functional way of actually looking at it. Yeah.
Whereas if I think the Secret Service shot him, that doesn't tell me anything about the world I live in and has no predictive value, right? Then it's just an accident of history. But once, like I said, if you look at what the CIA was doing before and after Kennedy, they were busy mowing down every leftist leader on the planet in the 50s and 60s. If they didn't
Yeah.
kill them, they took them out of office. There's a Do I have this book right behind me? I'm looking. Somewhere up here is my favorite book of all time is Thy Will Be Done. It's like Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. But it's really a history of the CIA because all those things connect in the intelligence world. And it's how, the oil companies and the CIA are almost the same thing.
Wow.
And to
Yeah.
get the land they need, they often have to overthrow leaders. And one of the
Mm.
easiest way to overthrow leaders is to go after the religious right in that country. And fundamentalists tend to think in very black and white terms and can be persuaded to take extreme action based on that black and white thinking. Whereas leftists and liberals tend to think in more colors, if you will, and it's harder to control them. And the downside of that, it's harder to get them to agree on any form of action. So in a sense, the right always wins because they're easier to manipulate.
Yeah, seen that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So real quick, who do you think did Epstein then?
Yeah, someone in the CIA, I think 100%
Yeah.
because he had the goods on everybody. I think he was working for the CIA and the Mossad. And again, CIA and blackmail is how they've controlled our government for decades. And Epstein is just the latest, most public face of it. But it's been going on before, and I'm sure there are other people doing it now. People
Oh,
are
yeah.
too naive. And if politicians learn from an early age that everybody is under surveillance and anything you do will be caught, it might be easier to get more honest politicians or not, because our brains really aren't wired to care what other people think, We got those
Yeah.
animal brains, and not a lot of us using our full brain all the time.
Mhm.
Oh, Jimmy Carter, I'll just give you a quick thing. There was an assassination attempt on Jimmy Carter here in Los Angeles, and I didn't know that when I first wrote my book. I since went and did kind of as deep a dive as I could because there's very few records on that. But evidently, the Secret Service saw a guy at a Jimmy Carter event that looked a little suspicious, and then they saw that he had a gun. So, of course, they went up to him, and his gun could only fire blanks. And it took them a while. They didn't get an immediate confession out of him, but the story basically ends with he was going to fire blanks as a distraction so that a guy with a rifle in a window could have killed Jimmy Carter.
Oh,
And
wow.
I name names and talk more about that in the updated version of the book. But that's, again, the same kind of plot as Sirhan using the blanks to distract
Mhm.
so that somebody else can get the job done. And David Ferry said the same thing. Oh, it was Perry Russo's testimony. I was reading Perry Russo's testimony at the Clay Shot trial, and he remembered Ferry talking about how in a triangulation of fire, one guy would have to be the distraction shot, and he would be the one sacrificed, meaning that would be the one
Right.
who was caught or killed or whatever, while
Mhm.
the others got away. And I think we need a level of conspiracy literacy so that when people shoot at Trump or Biden or whoever they're shooting at next or school shooters, that we ask the right questions because usually the police and the media won't. They really want to shut these things down. No conspiracy. It was just the guy that we got. And a lot of the reason for that is that it's a lot more work and a lot more money to find a whole conspiracy. And what if you don't like what you find,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all the parties have a motive to make it be the one patsy, and no one really has a motive for the truth, which is why I think our justice system should be changed. There should be three parties in every trial, not two: the defense, the prosecution, and the independent observer who challenges the actual facts of the case.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah,
like
wouldn't
that.
that be nice?
I could pick your brain all day. You clearly have a wealth of knowledge, and I am so envious of the fact that you can pull names and records out of your head like that.
Barely.
I do not have a brain like that at all. So,
It's harder as you get older, man. They don't always come.
and I know at the beginning you mentioned you're releasing a paperback.
Yeah, it's coming in April, so you can pre-order it now, but it won't be out till April. So
Just want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
thank you.
Thank you for listening to Villain for All Seasons. Be sure to like and subscribe. Find us on Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you find your podcasts.
I'm Dan.
I'm Andrew.
I'm still Ben.
And put the meat in my refrigerator, and you can do that in New York State. You can get a bear tag